Hello, and welcome to the NotACast podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Brenda B. Fish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 100th episode of the NotACast, titled The Hero's Journey, which is our story, of course. And it's actually a story of Bran's fourth chapter from the Clash of Kings, in which the skeptic Maester Luwin and the true believer Jojen Reed both struggle to get the protagonist of A Song of Ice and Fire onto their side.
If only they could get along as well as Jeff and I do, folks. And thank you so much for getting us to our 100th episode. We also recently just passed 1 million total downloads over on Podbean, which is awesome. We can't express how grateful we are for how much support you guys have put into this podcast. And we can't wait to keep bringing you the best we possibly can.
You guys are nice, and I like you, and you can now release my family, Emmett, for saying those nice things about the people that listen to us. But
we'll see. But if you behave.
If I behave, thank you. I appreciate that. But yes, in all seriousness, thank you guys very, very much for listening to us. It's amazing getting 1 million total downloads and being up to 100 episodes. It's cool. Not that. I mean, that's
not that Jeff cares or anything.
I don't care about this shit. Whatever the fuck, But it's really, really nice that you guys listen to us. It's gratifying to me. It makes me happy, and it makes me excited to come on to do this every single week with you guys. So thank you all very, very much. So as always, this episode is brought to you by our small council, our head of the king, Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, Mark N, Lord Travis, Master of Ships and Ward of the Waves, Sir Keith J, Master of Whisperers, Lord Phil the Merciful, Master of Laws, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, Ward of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscone, Scarlet the Other Red Woman and Mistress of Whisperers, Lord Micah, Ward of the West and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the Gym that was promised, the High Bearded Priest, Lord Jake, Assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Zena Valerian, Hedrigal, Captain of the Airship Arrogance, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Sir Jasper the Cruel, the King's Justice, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, one of the Eastern Mistress of Old Bay of Crabs, Steve the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Anonymous, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, a Priest of the Drowned God, the King's Cook, Noli Oli, Master of Cannoli, Sir Sorcidelica, Prince Matthew of House Targaryen, proud soy boy of Summerhall, defender of the Fifth Book and swing dancer with dragons, Sir K.W. Dent, Elsie of the Blackwood Guard and Batman of the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Pension for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Rainbow Commander of the They D's and Gentle Thems, Lord Quint, Esquire, Master of absolutely, positively not serving as a spy for several unnamed high lords and ladies in order to further the secret Blackfire-style conspiracy to overthrow the oppressive small council. Haldivar, the waiter for T-Wow, A.A. Ron, Dampere, Prophet of the Forsaken and High Priest of Euron Crowseye, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Veneris of House Colgarian, the First for Name, the Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overwork, Queen of Pencils, the Eraser and the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee the Great, Game of Thrones, Switches to the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Blender of Paints and Maker of Drawings, who, by the way, if title isn't luxurious enough already, is also celebrating a birthday today on our recording day on February 10th. So for you guys in the comment section, everyone wish Vanessa a very happy birthday, and happy birthday from both of us.
In honor of her and this episode, I'm wearing her shirt here on
that's
summer,
sweet.
Bran Stark's Wolf. So happy birthday, Vanessa, and happy birthday, Bran Stark. Let's just say it's Bran's birthday too. Why not? He's fictional. Sure. I can say that.
He just turned 9 in the chapter. Yeah, it's great.
True.
Stuff.
It's his 9th birthday now. I don't make the rules.
That's true. Sean Bell the Slayer, Lord Adam T, Lady Alexandra of Tarth, and thank you very much to all of our small council patrons.
Thank you, counselors, as always.
And our spoiler warning, as we say in all episodes, we'll potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Duncan Egg novellas, histories, interviews, the Winds of Winter sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones, a TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from Lord Travis, Master of Ships and Warden of the Waves, who asks, let's be honest. Always a good start. Bran wasn't a fully fleshed out character in seasons 7 and 8. He acted more as a plot device when he should have been a central focus due to his endgame state, King Bran, which I agree will happen in the books. We all believe that Bran will be even more essential in Wind and Dream, however, and may have a vital role not only in stopping the others, but in revealing Jon's true heritage and helping to mend Westeros following the Second War for the Dawn. The show provided 2 general reasons for Jon murdering Dany. She was pushing for war and liberation without end, and her actions could potentially lead to ensnaring and destroying the North and House Stark. The show framed antagonism between Sansa and Dany, which I'm sure will occur in some fashion. Northern independence and Jon's claim were expressed through Sansa, but do you think there's any potential for Dany-Bran conflict towards the end of the series that could force Jon's hand? Or do you think, like in the show, King Bran is a twist at the end? What do you think about that? All that, sir? How do you think Dany and Bran are going to interact in terms of these last few big plot twists in the story?
I'd be curious about what Bran might reveal about her relative Bloodraven. Of course, is the Three-Eyed Crow, which we will talk about, of course, at the end of this episode. I would be curious to see what Dany's reaction would be if Bran somehow reveals that he can see everything past, present, and future, and whether Bran might serve as this kind of Jojen-like figure to Daenerys Targaryen, because Jojen, in this chapter we're about to review, has a somewhat antagonistic relationship towards Bran in this chapter. The problem I see possibly is that the antagonism between Bran and Jojen doesn't get fully resolved in the narrative. It's still always going to exist, but their hostility between each other does kind of diminish over time. Although at the end of A Dance of Dragons, it's a little bit different because Jojen may already be paced at that point in time. Does the antagonism between Dany and Bran actually end? Is there hostility between the two characters in the story? I think it's a strong possibility, especially if Bran knows at some level he's going to be the final king of Westeros. He's going to be the person that is going to succeed Daenerys Targaryen. Would Bran be able to stay silent about that? I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure whether that's something he could stay silent about, or whether because he's a good-hearted lad, he would kind of reveal himself to Daenerys Targaryen. And Dany might not take kindly to that, because if we are taking stuff from the books, it's possible that she might have already dispatched with one pretender, namely in the form of young Griff. She might already have had a significant conflict between her and her nephew/lover, Jon Snow. Having a third person step up and say that he is going to be the one to succeed Daenerys Targaryen because he learned it from being the last Green Seer and having access to the Werewood network is going to potentially lead to a lot of conflict between Dany and Bran. So too long didn't listen to me rambling for a little while there. I do think that it could be a Dany Bran conflict towards the end of this series that ends up being why Jon ends up doing what he does, in addition to Sansa, in addition to Northern Independence, in addition to all the different reasons that are going to fester between Dany and Bran, to include Jon's newfound, possibly wolfish-like behavior after coming back in the form of Ghost, spending some time in Ghost, and how he might be as a character going forward in the Winds of Winter and beyond. So I've rambled a lot. Emmett, what do you think? Do you think that the Dany-Bran conflict is going to be the genesis of Jon Julius Caesaring Daenerys Targaryen at the end of the series?
I see the appeal of Bran like guilelessly giving Dany too much information, but I get the feeling George is going to keep Bran and Dany pretty much apart. Like they're kind of too powerful to share the space, and they're focused on completely different things. And I think Bran, if he knows exactly what's going to happen, is just going to probably stay out of Dany's way and let it happen. And I think there's enough motivation that you already explored, talking about the beats with young Griff, talking about Jon's conflict over the North versus, allowing Dany to rule from the Iron Throne. I think there's enough material there without Bran getting involved. And I do think Bran is kind of there to take over at the end more than he is, I think, to lead any charge against Dany. I don't think Bran. I think Bran, if Bran has a singular foe, I think it might be Euron. And I think if Dany has to focus her rage in terms of replacements, I think she already has young Griff and Jon for that. So I would lean towards Dany and Bran barely interacting at all, if I had to guess, because they kind of are on parallel tracks. They are like she has her own Bloodraven with Quaithe. I feel like they're a version of each other's kind of central orbit in different worlds, and they don't really need to share space.
That's interesting that you don't want to have two protagonists occupying the same narrative space. I mean, in Game of Thrones, Dany and Bran didn't really interact a whole lot besides being in a few council scenes together and otherwise just kind of staying out of each other's hair, which was probably for the betterment of Bran at least, and probably Dany at some level too. And I could see that definitely being the case for the books.
And yeah, I mean, I'm curious. I'll be curious, as you say, to see what Dany and Bran make of each other's powers in terms of what Bran thinks about dragons and what Dany thinks of Bran's Messiah narrative compared to hers. But I think maybe we'll see it just kind of all filtered through the lens of Jon, if that makes sense. Like Jon is like the glue between all these characters, really, and again, the focus might stay on him more than their individual interactions. But I could definitely see it obviously unfolding in any number of directions. So. Thank you, Lord Travis, for the question. If you'd like to ask us a question on the NotACast podcast, you're welcome to become a Sworn Sword or high-level patron over at patreon.com/NotACast ASOIAF, where you can get show notes, early access to every episode, Q&A, and bonus episodes. And speaking of those bonus episodes, our next Patreon-only episode will be Oh, I'm not going to sing it. I just
Do it, please. You got to do it. You got to sing it. Do it.
I'm saving my voice for my Jojen voice later in the episode. Every rose has its thorns. Our full analysis of House Tyrell, past, present, and future, is coming at the end of this month at Poor Fellow and Above Level patrons. Again, at patreon.com/NotACast, ASOIAF. I hope you're happy.
This is the perfect gift for me on the 100th episode that I finally got Emma to sing after spending so many episodes being berated for being the person to sing on the NotACast podcast.
Berated with love, I promise.
So good. Oh, my heart is just a flutter right now. It's so good.
Good.
Oh man, but yes, the Tyrells, they're great. They're not the Lannisters. They're actually House Frey of the Reach. It's gonna be great. So much to talk about them. So can't wait to do that. But enough about Patreon. When we last checked in with Bran Stark, because yes, this is a Bran episode. He had hosted the Harvest Feast at Winterfell and welcomed had welcomed Meera and Jojen Reed to Winterfell. Let's find out what Bran and those Reeds get up to in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, Bran 4. Meera Reed moves in a circle, frog spear in one hand, net in her other as Summer tracks her. Her spear darts out and Summer moves away from the thrust and jumps into Meera. But then Meera brings down the net on the direwolf who lands on top of her. Bran hooted, "You lose."
"She wins," her brother Jojen said. "Summer's snared."
He was right, Bran saw. Thrashing and growling at the net, trying to rip free, Summer was only ensnaring himself worse, nor could he bite through. Let him out. Meera laughs and throws her arms around Summer before rolling around with him while the poor doggo whines at still being in the net. Finally, Meera releases him and Bran calls Summer over to him for a fun little game. Bran reaches up and grabs the direwolf and Summer drags him across the grass. They're playing. It's nice. Is this a Song of Ice and Fire? Yeah, it is. Soon enough. Meera asks if Summer ever got angry, but Bran says that Summer never gets angry with him, and Summer won't hurt the Reeds either. He knows that Bran likes them. All of the other lords and knights had departed within a day or two of the Harvest Feast, but the Reeds had stayed on to become Bran's constant companions. Jojen was so solemn that old Nan called him Little Grandfather, but Meera reminded Bran of his sister Arya. She wasn't scared to get dirty, and she could run and fight and throw as good as any boy. She was older than Arya, though, almost 16, a woman grown. They were both older than Bran, even though his 9th day had finally come and gone, but they never treated him like a child. That's nice. Bran states that he wishes the Reeds were his wards instead of those shit fucking Freys as he crawls towards the heart tree. When Meera notices that Bran seems to be struggling, she attempts to help, but Bran doesn't need any help. He sits up against the heart tree and wonders at Meera fighting with the spear. Did the Master at Arms at Greywater Watch? One more time. Did the Master at Arms at Greywater Watch? Wow, it's a hard word to say. Greywater Watch teach her that? Nope. It was her dad, Howland Reed, who taught her. Greywater doesn't have a Master at Arms or Knights or even a Maester. Bran thinks this curious and wonders at how they receive ravens at Greywater Watch. They don't, or miraculously, they can't. Howl's castle moves. Bran doesn't know whether he's being mocked or not. Yeah, I know that feeling, Your Grace. So he asks whether he can visit the castle. "You would be most welcome, my prince, then or now." Now? Bran had spent his whole life at Winterfell. He yearned to see far places. I could ask Sir Roderick when he returns. The old knight was off east, trying to set to rights the trouble there. Roose Bolton's bastard had started by seizing Lady Hornwood as she returned from the Harvest Feast, marrying her that very night, even though he was young enough to be her son. Yikes. Then Lord Manderley had taken her castle. To protect the Hornwood holdings from the Boltons, he had written. But Sir Roderick had almost been as angry with him as he was with the bastard. Sir Roderick might let me go. Maester Luwin never would. Then Jojen Reed decides to start doing that Clash of Kings thing and begins saying cryptic shit at the protagonist, namely that Bran should leave Winterfell now. When Bran asks why, Meera reports that Jojen has the green sight, namely the ability to dream things that come true. Sometimes.
"There is no sometimes, Meera." A look passed between them, him sad, her defiant.
Oh, it's so good having you do Jojen Reed, man. It's amazing. Oh, love it, love it, love it. So Bran asks what's going to happen because that's what you do when you're dealing with prophets who can see the future, right? Yeah. But Jojen, again, and this is a hashtag mood in A Clash of Kings, says that maybe he'll tell Bran, but Bran has to show his first. By that, he means Bran's got to tell Jojen about the dreams he's been having. Well, that puts a nice cold chill in the air, and everyone and everything gets quiet. Bran thinks of the, quote, golden man and the three-eyed crow, and then helpfully remembers the taste of blood. But he deflects from the question, saying he doesn't remember the dream due to the sleep drugs that Luwin is giving him. Jojen asks if the drugs help, and Bran says sometimes. but Mira puts in that the whole castle is aware of Bran waking up screaming, and Jojen really doesn't want to know why. And Jojen really wants to know why Bran is so scared. But Bran doesn't want to talk about that. Dreams don't mean shit, right? In reality, yeah, sure. In fiction, they always mean something, Bran. God, just read the TV tropes page already. Mira states that, yeah, most dreams are nonsense, but Jojen's green dreams are a bit different.
Jojen's eyes were the color of moss, and sometimes when he looked at you, he seemed to be seeing something else, like now. I dreamed of a winged wolf bound to earth with gray stone chains, he said. It was a green dream, so I knew it was true. A crow was trying to peck through the chains, but the stone was too hard, and his beak could only chip at them.
Did the crow have 3 eyes? Jojen nodded. My God, what was old man doing appearing to Jojen in a dream? I mean, okay, guys, why is everyone looking at me like that? It always seems to be the case. It's a little bit terrifying. At this, though, Summer perks up towards Jojen, and Jojen continues with the story, saying that the 3-eyed crow came to him when he was a boy and when he nearly died of gray water fever. Bran blurts out that the 3-eyed crow came to Bran when he was comatose, warning him that he had to fly or die. But when he woke up, he was broken and he couldn't fly. But Mira knows better. Bran can fly if he wants, and Jojen picks up that line of thought, stating that Bran is the winged wolf. Jojen was skeptical at first, but now he knows for sure. The 3-eyed crow sent the reeds to Bran to break the chains. But sorry, the 3-eyed crow isn't in Greywater Watch. He's up north beyond the wall. Oh, wait, how did old Nan get beyond the wall? Isn't she at Winterfell right now? Stop looking at me. When Bran asks how they break the chains, Jojen replies that Bran will have to open his third eye. With his third eye, he'd be able to see the Winterfell heart tree in past, present, and future, from acorn to tree to stump. And Bran could see anything with his third eye, go anywhere. Bran, feeling nervous, says he really doesn't need to see that far. Anyways, guys, we should totally talk about lizard lions. You all like to hunt lizard lions. I bet they're super fucking fierce.
Did you dream of a lizard lion?
No, said Bran. I told you, I don't want.
Did you dream of a wolf?
He was making Bran angry. I don't have to tell you my dreams. I'm the prince. I'm the Stark in Winterfell.
Was it summer?
You be quiet.
The night of the harvest feast. You dreamed you were Summer in the Godswood, didn't you?
Stop it, Bran shouted. Summer slid toward the weirwood, his white teeth bared.
Jojen Reed took no mind. When I touched Summer, I felt you in him, just as you are in him now.
You couldn't have. I was in bed. I was sleeping.
You were in the Godswood, all in gray.
It was only a bad dream.
Jojen stood. I felt you. I felt you fall. Is that what scares you, the falling?
Yeah, it scares the fuck out of me. Great voice, Emmett. It's going to stay with me forever now. Thank you for that. Then Bran remembers falling, thinking about who it was that pushed him, Jaime Lannister. But he couldn't tell Roderick or Maester Luwin for reasons, I guess. And he won't tell Jojen Reed now. All Bran wanted was to forget about his trauma, and the best way to do that was to never speak of it, right?
Do you fall every night, Bran? Jojen asked quietly.
Summer growls, and it's not a friendly sound. Mira steps in front of Summer and tells Bran to keep his wolf back, but Bran reports that Jojen is making Summer angry. No, Jojen says it isn't Summer. It's Bran's anger and fear projecting onto Summer. It isn't. I'm not a wolf. Yet he howled with them at night and tasted blood in his wolf dreams.
Part of you is Summer, and part of Summer is you. You know that, Bran.
At that, Summer charges Jojen, but Mira blocks him and orders Bran to call him off. Bran tries, but it's to no avail. The wolf blood is on the wolf, but then it gets worse. Shaggy Dog approaches Jojen from behind. Mira then orders Jojen up a tree.
There's no need. Today is not the day I die.
But then Mira shouts for Jojen to get his ass up the tree, and he does so, followed by Mira, who jumps just in time to avoid Shaggy Dog's jaws closing around her ankle. Just then, Summer, whoops. I mean, when I was actually writing this, I actually wrote Summer instead of Bran, but, one and the same. And I'm keeping in the synopsis for that particular reason. So Bran/Summer remembers a way to avoid all this mess. He calls for Hodor to come, and Hodor comes up humming tunelessly. Bran orders Hodor to chase off the wolves, and the gentle giant goes about that cheerfully, waving his arms around until Shaggy Dog runs off, and Summer retreats to plop down next to Bran.
No sooner did Mira touch ground than she snatched up her spear and net again. Jojen never took his eyes off Summer. We will talk again, he promised Bran.
It wasn't the wolves. It wasn't me. He didn't understand why they'd gotten so wild. Maybe Maester Luwin was right to lock them in the Godswood. Hodor, he said, bring me to Maester Luwin. Bran loves Maester Luwin's turret, and he finds Luwin amidst a clutter of all his books and scrolls and bottles. I know that feeling. Luwin, for his part, is surprised to find Bran here so early and ahead of time for his lessons. So Bran explains that Jojen has the green sight and asks Luwin's opinion of it. Was it magic? Well, if that's the word Bran wants to use, Luwin ain't here to say he's wrong. Anyways, the children of the forest had green sight, and their wise men were called green seers, but it's not entirely clear what green sight was. Given that the first men cut down the wood trees, it's speculated that green sight revolved around the faces of the trees and seeing through the eyes that the children of the forest carved into their faces. Also, the green seers could mind control woodland creatures, birds, and apparently fish. Fish, that's interesting. But Jojen doesn't claim to have that power. His only power is that his dreams come true. All of us have dreams that come true, Luwin said. You dreamed of your Lord Father in the crypts before we knew he was dead, remember? Rickon did too. We dreamed the same dream. Call it green sight if you wish, but remember, as well as those tens of thousands of dreams that you and Rickon have dreamed that did not come true. Luwin then calls attention to his Maester's collar and points out the Valyrian steel link that he has. That link was for studying magic. Luwin had even attempted magic when he was at the Citadel, but there was no true magic left. Well, perhaps magic was once a mighty force in the world, but no longer. What little remains is no more than a wisp of smoke that lingers in the air after a great fire has burned out, and even that is fading. Valyria was the last ember, and Valyria is gone. The dragons are no more. Nope. The giants are dead. Nuh-uh. The children of the forest forgotten with all their lore. I guess it's sort of true, but they're not gone. No, my prince Jojen Reed may have a dream or two that he believes comes true, but he does not have green sight. No living man has that power. Later that day, Bran tells Mira what Maester Luwin told him and apologizes for what Summer did, but really, Jojen was being a fucking dick and a liar. The Three-Eyed Crow, also a liar. Everyone is lying to Bran all the time, and it's getting ridiculous. But Mira has it that maybe Luwin is wrong. And yeah, Bran's dad, Ned, listened to Luwin back in the day, but Ned made his own mind up. Kind of like what you should be doing, Bran. But does Bran maybe want to hear about a dream, Jojen dream? It involves Bran and the water phrase too, I guess. It can't be helped. Well, yeah, Bran would like to hear a dream about that involves him. It fulfills the Dennis Reynolds, if I'm not in any of these dreams and nobody's having sex, I just don't care criteria about dreams. You were sitting at supper, but instead of a servant, Maester Luwin brought you your food. He served you the king's cut off the roast, the meat, rare and bloody, but with a savory smell that made everyone's mouth water. The meat he served, the phrase, was old and gray and dead. Yet they liked their supper better than you liked yours. I don't understand. You will, my brother says. When you do, we'll talk again. That night, Bran is scared to come to dinner, but when he finally arrives, he finds that it's only pigeon pie for him and everyone else. There seemed nothing amiss with dinner. Nothing was wrong. So Maester Luwin was right. Nothing bad was on its way to Winterfell. Hooray! Crisis averted! Woo woo! There's relief in that, but there's also disappointment. So long as there was magic, anything could happen. Ghosts could walk, trees could talk, and broken boys could grow up to become knights. But there isn't, he said aloud in the darkness of his bed. There's no magic, and the stories are just stories. And that is A Clash of Kings Bran 4. You know, I previously thought Bran's story was my least favorite in A Clash of Kings before doing this reread podcast, but boy, am I pleasantly surprised by how good these chapters are, man. I mean, the Dany chapters, yeah, they're obviously the worst parts of A Clash of Kings, but these Bran chapters are amazing. And I think it really comes down, honestly, to how much emotion George embeds into Bran's story. And I wonder if you agree with that, or if you have a different take on how George is writing Bran's chapters into Clash of Kings.
I totally agree. They're really growing on me this read as well. And I think it's so fortuitous that our 100th episode landed on a chapter specifically that just runs the gamut of everything great about A Song of Ice and Fire. You got important character beats for Bran. You got perfectly paced revelations about his new supporting characters, Jojen and Mira Reed. You got a tense little action scene with the direwolves, a beautifully written dialogue scene with Maester Luwin, and just a devastating ending that both summarizes all of the above and complicates it further. And just like these other visually vibrant A Clash of Kings chapters we've been covering, there's gorgeous imagery all the way through. It's the kind of chapter that just makes me grateful to be doing this with you, sir.
That's really nice of you to say, man. That's sweet. Thank you. I will, everyone who says that Emmett is not sweet and nice, I think you're wrong, and you should probably fire yourself under the gun. I will after, I'll DM to you, because that's where the real Song of Ice and Fire is sung in DM, as I was saying on Twitter a little while ago. But yeah, that's I'm honestly, I'm extremely grateful to be on this journey with you. And of course, all you guys who are watching on the live stream and listening to us on the podcast form. It's amazing. It's so great. It's good to be doing this with Bran Stark in this chapter. And one of those things I really love about doing this chapter by chapter, week by week podcast is how granular we get when we're doing these chapters. I mean, I love being able to look at how George is doing narratives, specifically how he's, deconstructing writing tropes. He's not just deconstructing tropes in terms of fantasy genre. He's also doing it from the meta level of deconstructing writing tropes. I'll explain. So if you're a writer, you've heard the trope, show, don't tell. It's a pretty good maxim, all things considered, for writers and how you're supposed to do exposition. Instead of doing, large jumps of people explaining things, show it, demonstrate it. But George in this chapter eschews that. He has Luwin tell the backstory of the Children of the Forest, the Green Seers, and whether Jojen has any magical ability. And it's pretty effective, right? Because the information that Luwin conveys is wrong. Almost all of it is wrong. And later in Dance Dragons, instead of doing the tell, don't show, he's actually going to show, not tell, the truth about the Children of the Forest, the Green Seers, warging in werewoods, at the Three-Eyed Crow's cave. It's great. It's fantastic. It's spooky. It's amazing. And that's an effective, in my opinion, that's an effective subversion of a writing trope. And I think that's what George means when he says things like he writes the books to reward rereading. That's a mouthful. But let's move beyond, my own personal self-congratulation for picking up on this thing that George may or may not have intended, and towards praising George himself in writing a Clash of Kings Bran 4, because my God, is it good. So Emmett, I guess my question for you is, what is it about Bran's 4th chapter in Clash of Kings that makes it so good as a chapter?
I think what really makes Bran 4 work so well is the tone, or rather the tones, because George is moving deftly between multiple moods as we go through the chapter. The chapter opens on a duel between Summer and Mira, which, as first-time readers, we don't know is only for show. Like, the direwolves have been consistently aggressive to outsiders in Winterfell. We saw that with Tyrion. We saw that with the guy who tried to kill Bran when he was in a coma. We saw it with the wildlings and the deserted watchmen in the woods. We saw it with the young Walder's Frey earlier in this book. And last time we checked in with Bran, he had slipped inside Summer's skin to see the Reed siblings approaching. And this opening scene is a mirror to that one. So I think as first-time readers, we're supposed to tense up at this, wondering if we're about to see Summer hurt Mira, or the other way around. Not until Bran laughs and says that Mira loses do we know that we're in fact watching playtime. As Bran says, the Reeds have come under Summer's protection. He won't hurt them because Bran likes them, because they become like family, part of the pack. The tone of the scene immediately changes and becomes lighter. Bran has friends again. He's the happiest we've seen him since the fall. This tone continues with Mira laughing, Summer whining, and then Bran frolicking with his wolf across the grass. Like, this is pure, innocent love, and it's a sacred thing. As we've said about the Winterfell Godswood before, it's an oasis, a source of renewal and strength for characters ranging from Bran to Ned to Theon. That doesn't make it bloodless, quite the opposite, as we see the Godswood associated with blood throughout the story. Ned cleans his sword here after executing Garrod. Maester Luwin bleeds out beneath the Heart Tree in the final pages of this book, and Bran tastes sacrificial blood at the end of his psychedelic journey into that same tree in A Dance with Dragons. But even that blood is connected to home, hearth, heritage, meaning, wisdom, and the ultimate renewal of life associated with hero's journey characters like Bran. And so this chapter does initially feel much smaller in scope than the last couple Bran chapters. The northern nobles whose political wrangling and exuberant feasting took up so much space in the last couple Bran chapters have all left, save for the Reeds of Greywater Watch.
Yeah, Winterfell's feeling a little bit empty, and it's kind of a nice feeling. It's after you've had a large party at your house and everybody's finally gotten the fuck out, and you finally have the space to think about the world and consider things. It's great. I mean, it's one of my favorite feelings. I don't know about you guys who are watching or listening. But it's not just that Winterfell is empty necessarily. I mean, it is, obviously, but there is some remnants, some specter, as I call it, of what actually occurred at the Harvest Feast kind of hanging over this happy start to this chapter. And later, Bran's going to be thinking about how Lady Hornwood was seized by Ramsay Snow on her way back to Castle Hornwood and then was forced to marry said Ramsay Snow. And now the Vanderlees had taken the Hornwood Castle, and Roderick Cassel was out on the field attempting to bring peace to these warring factions in the north. The consequence of Luwin and Roderick's unwillingness to act in Rob's name at the Harvest Feast with regard to the Hornwood inheritance crisis is now being felt outside of Winterfell. It's no longer it's no longer people trying to treat with the Starks in order to get their favorite outcome. It's no longer the silence of the Boltons. It is actually blood that is being shed out in the Wolf's Wood, out in the north, and in and around Castle Hornwood. So even though the nobles are gone now, and even though this chapter open is really, I think it's close to being the happiest chapter opens in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, there's dread on the horizon just outside of the Winterfell Godswood. And it, or he, is coming to Winterfell in the very next Bran chapter. Unfortunately for Bran, the Reeds arrive before Reek does, who is that person who was very bad coming to Winterfell. And boy, they have such a different relationship to Bran than any other character so far in the story.
The Reeds seem content, at first, just to serve as court companions to their fresh young prince. And you could easily interpret this as the Game of Thrones at work, as Maester Luwin probably did until Bran talks to him about Jojen's dreams. Luwin probably, interprets the Reed's desire to stay at Winterfell as, Howland Reed, Ned's old war buddy, he's seeking to improve the influence of his house through his children, now that Northern independence has made Winterfell a royal court unto itself. And so they're not making explicit demands of Bran. They're supposed to just be there. They're just happy to be around him. And that's such a refreshing change for him, given how Bran has felt in this book so far. Constantly pulled in two directions at once. The external demands of the prince clashing with the internal demands of the warg, the beastling, the skin changer. Bran has had his shoulders hunched defensively all the way through Bran 1, 2, and 3. For once, as Bran 4 opens, he is relaxed in the present moment. And you can really see that in how he's much more comfortable with his body than he has been any other time after the fall. He's wrestling around with Summer in front of people. He's rejecting help without letting the offer of help ruin his good time. This is such a great change for Bran. He even compares Mira to Arya. If he squints, it's like he finally has his family back. And that's how you know it can't last. George slowly turns up the spookiness factor throughout the scene, making both Bran and the reader gradually aware of exactly why the Reeds came, why they stuck around when the rest left, and what's going to happen with them now. But before we dig into exactly what Jojen Elf on a Shelf Reed has to say about the cosmos and Bran's central place within it, we got to just praise the buildup of it. And again, it's all about the tone. You get that initial jolt of fear associated with the direwolf, backed up when Mira reminds Bran that the wolves have in fact drawn blood. This makes it feel like a natural progression when they get angry later in the chapter. Then, even as we smile at Bran enjoying himself again, George sprinkles in little ominous notes surrounding Jojen, who is the one throwing off this whole happy tableau, just like Tyrion was interrupting Cersei and Lancel. Jojen starts the chapter off contradicting Bran about who really run the duel. Was it Summer, or was it Mira with her net? And you can see, so while Summer, who is Bran's other half, seems to be in charge, it's the Reeds who have snared him. And that sets up the dynamic in this scene perfectly. Are the Reeds here to help Bran, to show him the truth, preserve his life, shelter him as he becomes the protagonist he is destined to be? Or are they basically here to kidnap him? If Summer represents Bran, then the Reeds with their net could represent the Children of the Forest with their weirwood net snaring Bran's mind and soul. After all, Jojen is directly sitting under the heart tree in this scene, speaking for the three-eyed crow, and the Crannogmen are constantly associated with the Children of the Forest. So I think the question that should be running through the reader's mind is Jojen really breaking Bran's chains, as he claims, or is he merely fastening another subtler set of chains on him? Then you have Bran noting that old Nan calls Jojen little grandfather, which is just hilarious as a flex. You have this insane old woman calling this kid a little grandfather. That's just classic old Nan sass. But like everything else about Jojen, it's spooky when you actually think about it. Like that he's this kid who comes off like he's an old man, like he's a changeling, like there's something off about him. Again, it feels like a Children of the Forest parallel. He's childlike, but ancient. Jojen has an old soul in a disconcerting way, like that's not really him in there. That's the feeling you get off him.
Right. The spirit of 1,000 dreamers or the skulls of 1,000 dreamers, or bones, so to speak, when we get to the Three-Eyed Crow. I got it right the third time. But it's very much how the feeling that I also get from Jojen Reed. Small, seemingly old, yet kind of childlike in some ways. That's kind of how the Children of the Forest are when Bran meets them in A Dance of Dragons, isn't it? And more to your point about, Jojen being an old soul, when Leaf, that child of the forest, is explaining the perspective of the Children of the Forest in Dance, I can feel George doing a bit of narrative paralleling between Jojen and the Children of the Forest via Leaf's monologue about her world dying around her. Yeah, it's very much like Jojen Reed, guys. So here's what Leaf says. Before the first men came, all this land that you call Westeros was home to us. Yet, even in those days, we were few. The gods gave us long lives, but not great numbers, lest we overrun the world as deer will overrun a wood when there is no wolves to hunt them. That was in the dawn of days, when our sun was rising. Now it sinks, and this is our long dwindling. The giants are almost gone as well. They who are our bane and our brothers. The great lions of the western hills have been slain. The unicorns are all but gone. The mammoths down to a few hundred. The direwolves will outlast us all, but their time will come as well. In the world that men have made, there is no room for us. So, I mean, for me, it's like more than just the common physical traits and similarities between the children of the forest and Jojen Reed, small stature and green eyes, and that kind of mystical commonality that we're going to talk about here later at the end of this podcast. The green dreams, the green sights, it's the emotional commonalities between the children of the forest and Jojen that really makes me think that the Reeds do truly descend from some sort of union between the children of the forest and the first men. Is that the new way that Bran has ahead of him, though? I mean, is Bran supposed to be this sad, melancholic figure just like Jojen Reed? Is that actually better than what he's actually living his life in Winterfell as? Now he's at least a little bit comfortable, even if it is kind of shitty being paralyzed and not having greensight or warging or skin changing or becoming a beastling. That's the question I have for you. Is it better to be Bran the Broken than Bran the Winged Wolf? I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, that's the choice he's faced with throughout this chapter. And if Mira and Some are fighting and dueling and having a great time at the start represents the old life into which Bran wants to wake back up, then Jojen speaks for the trees and the dreams, keeping him in his new life. And as such, Bran feels just like so crestfallen when he gradually realizes they want something from him after all. They weren't just his friends. It's a magical form of all the Stark vassals angling for political power in Bran's first 3 chapters in the book. And in a way, we're like reenacting his fall. Bran starts this chapter out happy and playing with Wolf and his loved ones, and then a magical figure interrupts to warn him of destiny and force him to grow up. And the forcing him to grow up part is crucial. I don't think you can separate Bran's magical journey from his coming of age, and I think George is tying the two deliberately together here. Jojen is the emissary of the Three-Eyed Crow, but he's also a replacement big brother, forcing Bran to be a man instead of playing the boy, as Rob said before he left.
Or, I mean, he could be a big brother. He could also be family-friendly Charon, ferrying Bran towards his, messianic destiny. We'll get to all that.
Exactly.
But before, we actually do, all of that kind of weird psychedelic shit that is totally Emmett's beat, I love the point you're making, though, about Jojen and Mira are subbing in for his lost family. Little and Big Water Frey fucking suck, but they also failed as his foster brothers. Bran can't stand being around them, and Luwin and Roderick have mixed success of being Bran's mom and dad to both him and to his brother. Mira and Jojen, though, as we see in this chapter, they're succeeding where others have failed. Mira specifically is breaking Bran's melancholy that he's been experiencing since his injury and his fall back in Game of Thrones Bran 2. And he's only succeeding for a moment. She's only succeeding for a moment before, of course, Jojen. That's bringing right back into that melancholy. So the additional layer to Mira, though, is that one of my favorite kind of undervalued ships is the idea of Mira and Bran together. I'm sure our friend Just Reds will come up with a nice ship name for Mira and Jojen. I'm tasking you with that right now, so go ahead and do that right now. But yeah, you start to see Bran's crush start to develop on her, right? As he thinks she wasn't scared to get dirty and she could run and fight and throw as good as a boy. It's cute, right? I mean, it's super fucking cute. It's that start of a 9-year-old boy's crush. It's kind of really good writing on George's part, showing how this sort of thing works for a 9-year-old kid. And on the other hand, Jojen, as we've been saying, is framed really differently from Mira, and his relationship to Bran only gets weirder as this chapter progresses. God, does it get weird.
The structure of this chapter overall is a perfect microcosm of the structure of a Clash of Kings as a whole, this dialectic unfolding between the political and magical worlds. Bran and the reader both slowly understand not only that Jojen and Mira weren't fully honest about why they came to Winterfell, but that they belong to a completely different part of the story than advertised upon their introduction. Bran is their prince, sincerely and earnestly, but Jojen especially sees him as something more. Godhead, tree of life, hinge of the world, cosmic ordained center of creation. How do you bridge that gap? That's a question that not only applies to the characters, but the author and the audience. George has to convince not only Bran, but the reader that his Arthurian protagonist can move between worlds and so solve their interrelated problems. He structures this scene like the book as a whole around that dynamic. Specifically, he steers the light conversation at the start of the chapter into deeper, darker waters by picking up on the theme of Crannog culture brought up with the Reed's introduction in Bran 3. Bran is trying to reach out to his companions and vassals, just like he did at the feast when he asked Sir Roderick, do they really eat, like lizard lions and fish and birds down there? And then he thought, well, maybe they just haven't tried beef, and he was reaching out and showing them his culture. And now he asks about their masters at arms. How do you do things down there? While telling them that he much prefers them to their racist enemies, the phrase. This is the Prince of Winterfell at work, sincerely. Of course, it's being expressed in like kind of, childish, petulant terms because Bran is 9. But it's like it's an important thing that Robb's heir is preferring the Reeds over the Freys. Like that means something politically, especially given the history between the Reeds and the Freys. Like, again, this is Bran acting in the political side. This is Bran acting as Prince first.
That's why you can't separate the magical from the political, especially when we're talking about Bran Stark. And you were talking about Bran as the Prince of Winterfell, and with season 8 in mind, we also have to think about this chapter in relation to Bran as the future king of Westeros, and that's, I feel like, as at work with his relationship to the Reeds. I mean, learning about unique cultures of vassal houses and lords, and learning about them as people, bestowing favor on them over less trustworthy allies, is how you win in a feudal setting. I mean, it sounds silly to say that Bran's attempt to make childhood friends is how to be a good king, but that's really the case for Westeros and how feudal relationships work. We need only to look at Robert and Ned's friendship under Jon Arryn's fosterage to see how 3 kingdoms of Westeros were bound together to become the first 3 of Robert's rebellions. And yet, each feudal relationship is unique, different, weird. Robert, Ned, and Jon Arryn found this out with the Tullys and the Lannisters. Like, that was not a really easy, happy relationship that they had. They somehow made it work, mostly through marriage alliances. So too, Bran is about to find this out about House Reed. They are weird, unique, special, and a little bit antagonistic. At least Jojen is.
And there's navigating those cultural differences are a huge part of politics. We see that with Dany's storyline all across the society she moves through in Essos. We see that with Stannis, and one of his best moves is crossing the cultural divide with the Northern Mountain clans. And we see this too with Bran reaching out to the Reeds. Just like how they eat differently down in the Neck, they don't have masters at arms, nor maesters, any of the cultural markers of the world Bran knows, the world of which he is prince, his political world at Winterfell. He must step into mist and mysticism to navigate their world, and the tone quickly becomes less innocuous and, as you say, more threatening as he does so. Greywater Watch specifically immediately feels like it belongs to the astral plane as much as reality, just like Winterfell itself, or Dragonstone, or Harrenhal, or Karth, all these locations we're discussing in A Clash of Kings. Howland's castle moves, and yes, that is a reference to Howl's Moving Castle, but it also hints that the Reeds belong to the world of dreamers and weirwood faces. They're a parallel to the Night's Watch, hence watch in their castle's name. They keep watch for the North on its southern border. Moat Caelin's broken castle stand in for Castle Black. The Neck and the Wall are their true fortresses. And in both cases, the political borders of the North disappear into this haunted dreamscape where the whispers of the children of the forest reign supreme. Now, in the present day of the story, politically speaking, the Starks are the North, and the North is the Starks. We'll see evidence of that throughout A Dance with Dragons, especially. But the Reeds are a reminder of the deal the Starks made way back in the mists of time in order to secure that modern-day political legacy, in order to make it even possible in the present. The first men were only able to throw back the Andals because of the defenses of the Children of the Forest. Just like how Winterfell's central position in the north is rooted in the magically inclined hot springs below the castle, the independent north that Robb now rules, that Bran is now prince of, is built on the bones, sometimes literally, of the magical world that preceded it. Now, that's not to say that the Reeds or even the Children of the Forest are here to, like, usurp the Starks and renege on the deal. The Starks are the only chance to keep the deal. That's the point. The oath that Mira and Jojen swore to Bran in his previous chapter is rooted in this older, sacred, mystical arrangement, as much as contemporary feudal norms. So far in his story, Bran thinks of his princely duties as Stark in Winterfell as something he does during the day, in opposition to the wolf dreams of night. And what the Reeds have come to do is bridge that gap, telling Bran that these are two halves of the whole, the winged wolf, and he must reconcile them. And that is the essence of the hero's journey. There's this a great French movie I love called L'Intrus, The Intruder. It came out like 15 years ago. It was directed by this woman, Claire Denis, who's a great director, who's having kind of a revival the last few years. She made a movie called High Life with Robert Pattinson last year that everyone loved. And this movie, L'Intrus, opens with this character who represents death, just staring down the camera, lighting a cigarette, and she says in voiceover, "Your worst enemies are hiding inside, in the shadows in your heart." And that's the revelation at the core of the hero's journey. That's what stories like Bran's are all about. The underlying function of the mentors and the innermost cave and the supernatural aid, etc., is just to bring this truth to the surface. And this truth is very painful, but necessary for maturation. The monster in the darkness is you. And what you do after you realize that is what makes you who you are. Darth Vader has Luke's face in the cave in Empire Strikes Back for a reason. This is the point. And part of what makes Jojen different from the other heralds of wonder and terror in A Clash of Kings, like Melisandre or Quaithe or Jaqen H'ghar, is that Jojen directly addresses this structure, while the other ones all hide it behind like mantras and obfuscation and side quests. Now, Jojen isn't exactly being honest with Bran in this chapter. There is a whole lot he's leaving out, and we know that especially coming back as rereaders. But he is blunt and direct about what's happening to Bran in a way that the others aren't because they don't have to be. Melisandre regards Stannis as a blunt instrument of prophecy. She needs his signature on the dotted line and not much more than that. Quaithe obviously is even more opaque, but if I had to guess, I would say she sees Daenerys in much the same way. Jaqen, of course, seems reluctant to tell Arya what he's all about until she passes his little test. But Jojen needs Bran to be conscious and partially informed, at least, about what's happening inside him. Because for Bran to fulfill his destiny, he needs to actively shape and expand his powers, whereas those other Messiah figures just need to follow their pre-existing motives in the right direction as far as their mentors are concerned. Like, Stannis doesn't get his own visions until the Storm of Swords. Arya doesn't show up at the House of Black and White until A Feast for Crows. Dany doesn't ride a dragon until like the end of A Dance with Dragons. But Bran was born to build the future, not merely help bring it about. So he needs to open his third eye like yesterday in order to save the world. So Jojen has to be a little more forthcoming with him.
That's amazingly said.
Oh, thank you.
It's awesome. And I think it's a deliberate contrast to how the other mentor figures are operating with their own particular protagonists, because they're all telling them to play roles, to basically be taking on the drapings of power, to cast shadows on walls. And it's fascinating the point that you're regarding specifically about Stannis, because this is the Stannis podcast, in that Stannis starts receiving visions in the flames in A Storm of Swords just prior to him sailing north to, quote, save the realm from Mance Rayder, in quotation marks, of course, and putting the kingdom before the throne. But in Clash, so many of like these minders and these mentor figures are urging their protagonists to project images and play stage-like roles in a play. You know, they're sourcing their power to those images that they're projecting on the wall. Varys is playing up how Tyrion can cast shadows and accumulate power through where people believe power resides. Maester Luwin has Renly playing up the southern chivalric ethos and colors and marriage to his beautiful daughter. And Melisandre has Stannis adapting the drapings of being a Azor Ahai reborn with a religious ceremony on the beach, burning the idols from the Faith of the Seven. The contrast is Jojen, right? I mean, of all these characters, the mentor figures, it's Jojen Reed who's calling Bran to unlock real power, warging, green sight, skin changing, etc. Like, he's got so much power that he wants Bran to unlock and to get a hold of, because it's so important, not just for the North, not just for Bran Stark, not just for House Reed, House Stark. It's important for the salvation of the world, because the apocalypse is fucking coming, guys. But to get Bran into the correct mental state to embrace that call to adventure, if we're going to use the Campbellian ethos, no, they're not ethos, but whatever. Jojen, like all of our other mentor figures, has to use turns in the conversation, real conversation. This is why I think George is often cited as writing really good dialogue and conversation, because it feels real. And he uses those turns in the conversation to get Bran to out his unspoken abilities and power here in this chapter.
Yes, Jojen takes advantage of all this talk of Greywater Watch, how it's culturally different from Winterfell and also magical and weird, to shift the conversation to how Bran's self-conception and role in the story is about to change for good, that Bran is about to shift away from considering a place like Greywater Watch in terms of its political import and more for its magical import. And I love how George manages this transition, because Bran's head is full of this naive yearning to see far places. He's still the tiny fantasy reader, caught up in his dreams of Middle-earth, wishing to travel outside his home for the first time. And Jojen is taking advantage of that to tell him to do, well, exactly that. Leave home, get on the road, and let it sweep you away. Step outside the egg onto your hero's journey and do it as quickly as possible, kid. Because danger is lurking for the sacred golden homestead, as it tends to for protagonists. But George interestingly swerves on us here. He keeps Jojen's prophetic warning of the Ironborn invasion of the North, the danger he's talking about, in his back pocket for Bran 5 when it's too late to do any good.
Yeah, it's one of those things that George does that's really good as a writer, but it's also frustrating as a reader, intentionally so on George's part. I guess that, here's where I get to play the annoying interloper with you, sir, in that the part I'm a little bit unclear is Jojen in this scene implies that Bran needs to leave Winterfell like right fucking now to avoid the coming calamity in the form of the Ironborn. And he's later going to reveal in Bran's next chapter that the sea is coming to Winterfell. It'll flow over the walls, and that reek will cut the faces off Bran and Rickon. But then here, and then also like throughout all of Bran's chapters, Jojen will consistently state that this is all predestined. This is destiny, and they can't avoid what's coming. So my question to you is, why is Jojen urging Bran to leave Winterfell now, knowing that destiny cannot be averted?
I think Jojen is conflicted about what it is exactly he's supposed to be doing, and I think he's getting kind of mixed messages from his own prophetic images versus the ones Bloodraven is directing to him specifically. Because while Bloodraven definitely directed the winged wolf dream to Jojen, I don't get the sense that the other dreams that Bloodraven is particularly in charge of them or cares. So maybe Jojen is having difficulty discerning what path the Three-Eyed Crow has him on and what exactly the nature of those images are. Mira and Bran kind of jump to the conclusions of those images regarding Reek specifically later on. Jojen holds back and more ambiguously. As he says, he just doesn't know why he's been given these visions if they're not allowed to change anything. But he does have a specific directive from both his father and Bloodraven. I think he's trying to follow that even in the face of contradictory visions.
I'll accept that answer for now, but yes, I'm still curious about how all of this works. But I also see, I think too, like Jojen, as much as he is a very mystical type figure, he is also human at the same time. So maybe like all these characters who attempt to avoid destiny, he's attempting to do his own part to trying to kind of avoid the destiny that could, or that he's potentially seen in a green dream of first falling onto Bran.
We're going to see the same question with Melisandre, and she manages to kind of like bluff her way through it with zealotry, which Jojen doesn't quite do, but there's always a contradiction at the heart of this stuff, in large part because we're just mortal and we're not made to handle this stuff or interpret it properly, as we see throughout the series. But what it does have an impact on is how we treat each other, and Jojen uses his own powers here as a lure to get Bran to expose his, reaching past all pretense to directly address the elephant in the room, namely Bran's magical dreams. And this has hung over Bran's story since his coma vision in Book 1. It returned to prominence when he and Rickon shared dreams of their father's death. But it serves as a sudden jolt here because it's a newcomer talking about the dreams out of nowhere. All of a sudden, Jojen is speaking not for his father, Howland Reed of the Neck, Dad's old war buddy, but the Three-Eyed Crow. Everything about this relationship has permanently changed. Jojen drags the dream world into the daylight, and as you might imagine, that is a hideously unsettling experience for Bran. There's a moment like this early on in best novel ever, Gravity's Rainbow, when our first POV character, Pirate Prentice, recounts how he first realized his dreams were more than just dreams. A man in real life spoke to him a sentence he had heard, word for word, the night before, in a dream. And that's what Bran is going through here, the purely uncanny, a sudden loss of the ability to tell what's real and what's only in your head. He will describe it in his final chapter in this book when he finally opens his third eye as seeing double. And George gets this David Lynchian feeling across by bringing the conversation to a dead stop. In silence, all the imagery comes rushing in on Bran at once. Wolf dreams, flying dreams, falling dreams, invading his everyday life as Prince of Winterfell. As always in A Clash of Kings, the change is communicated by colors. Golden man and copper blood, as Bran describes them. A rainbow flooding over the gray, white, and black. Jojen has crossed and therefore broken the borders Bran has been trying so hard to maintain between these worlds. And much like how Melisandre had to share the contents of a couple visions with Stannis in order to get his buy-in, Jojen has to offer up a dream of his own in order to get his chosen one to trust his new magical mentor figure. Jojen describes his dream as being a green dream. That's how he knew it was true. But he also identifies the stone chains as gray, so it's not quite clear how the color works in these dreams and what gives away that it's a green dream. So immediately we get the ambiguity George loves with magic, tied into that expanding color scheme. We see that also with Summer's golden eyes, regarding Jojen with an ambiguous expression, as Jojen talks about all of this. Because the direwolves seem like they're tied into Bloodraven and the Old God stuff, but they still don't necessarily treat Jojen like a friend. Jojen is connected through those golden eyes to the golden man in Bran's dreams, who both shattered his legs and opened his third eye. It's the presence of the Three-Eyed Crow in Jojen's green dream that convinces Bran that Jojen is legit. Okay, finally, here at last is someone who will understand what's happening to me. So Bran eagerly confesses that the crow came to him as well. And Jojen reveals in turn that the crow is to be found in the far north, beyond the wall. It's this give and take between them, reminiscent of the pacts of information and control between human and children I brought up earlier. We as readers at this point are just like craning forward eagerly because we're getting exposition not only about Bran or magic in general, but about the first sign of magic in the series, the one that's been hanging over the rest, the apocalyptic kind in the frozen north. But George keeps the real deal in the background, as he does in the Jon chapters in this book. He's saving the full-on horror of the Army of the Dead for the very beginning of A Storm of Swords. Here, what he's focusing on is Bran's character arc, above all, as you say, the Joseph Campbell stuff, the refusal of the call. And after Bran received his call to adventure back in book 1, he's been struggling with crossing the first threshold, which he will finally cross at the very end of this book. As Campbell puts it, his flowering world becomes a wasteland of dry stones. His life feels meaningless. And yeah, that's Bran, with the wasteland of dry stones being Winterfell. From the outside, his life and the parallel life of the realm of which he is prince is expanding. But inside, he's conflicted and standing still. Jojen says he's offering Bran a way to break his chains, to square the circle between the walls of Winterfell and the world calling outside, as we saw at the end of his first chapter in this book. And along with that offer comes a promise of adventure and escape. You love the scary stories, Bran Stark? Well, here's your chance to star in one. Jojen delivers a mentor monologue rooted in so many books and movies and just like oral traditions. Open your third eye. It comes alive when you're asleep. It can complete you and show you past and present and future. But in order to break Bran's chains, Jojen really does need Bran to cross that border with him, to bring the inside to the outside, the night world into the daylight. Jojen can only show Bran the door. Bran has to walk through it, and Bran is refusing. Why is that? It's complicated. In part, it's just like a knee-jerk combination of nervousness and disbelief and what Jojen is talking about here. Like, I think, kids might think they want their stories and dreams to come to life, but in reality, that would be a disorienting, frightening thing to experience, someone talking intimately about your dreams. So Bran immediately pulls back when Jojen is talking about seeing with his heart and seeing a tree as an acorn. He says, I don't need to see so far. He's freaked out. Despite wanting to fly, despite feeling betrayed when he woke up and found that he couldn't, talking about this kind of thing in the waking light of day with his vassals and friends is frightening. And it's very telling that Bran tries to end this uncomfortable line of questioning by circling back around to how the conversation started, Crannog culture. In the face of magical revelation, magical temptation, our protagonist is taking refuge in the political. He's trying to say in this moment, oh no, I'm not a wolf dreamer, actually. No, I'm just a prince of Winterfell. Let's talk about lizard lines. Let's talk about life in the neck. Let's talk about the things that the Stark in Winterfell and his vassals would talk about, not the things that the winged wolf and his magical mentor would talk about. But ironically, Bran is still trying to, quote, see so far in this conversation, in a way by trying to learn more about the neck, which is so far away. And lizard lions, for him, are fantastical creatures of legend and myth, so he hasn't really escaped it. Because as I said, the mists of Avalon surround the north in both directions. To go north, you must go south. The neck is as linked to the magical world as much as the political. Bran can't escape the dream world, nor his destiny within it. And so Jojen just blows right past his feeble attempt to change the subject. Tell us about your dreams, kid.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me that Bran, in effect, he has this idea that he wants to see outside of the world. He wants to experience things that he can't experience because of his paralysis, because he has lost the ability to walk. He thinks that he might be able to fly because the three-eyed crow had told him as much as in his first dream of the three-eyed crow back in the Game of Thrones. But he falls back into this fantasy world when Jojen is presenting him the cold reality that, yes, you can do all these magical, fantastical, wonderful things, but then Bran's like, no, that's not what I meant at all. I was kind of like thinking about like watching a movie about this. That's more what I had in mind. And actually experiencing, seeing a shy and seeing the far north. And, one of the fascinating things about this chapter too is that Jojen says that he can see way, way up in the north, but Bran has already seen that. He doesn't reveal it to Jojen here, but Bran has already seen the heart of winter. And I wonder if that is the narrative device that George is utilizing here subtextually to have Bran reject wanting to be a part of that, to embrace that power, because the true north, the heart of winter, is fucking terrifying. It's a place where the others are. It's the place where the apocalypse is potentially emanating from. Like George has said, we will find out more about the true north come the winds of winter. So we will likely learn about what the actual heart of winter is, and probably a little bit more. We definitely learn more backstory about the others as well. But that sort of stuff is scary. Like in terms of like what you would see as a kid, you want to see like the pyramids, you want to see the Eiffel Tower, you want to be able to experience things that are nice and lovely. But the world isn't all nice and lovely. Sometimes you see the Eiffel Tower. Sometimes you see in the middle of a volcano. Sometimes you see wonderful sights and amazing animals and great things. And other times you see horrific monsters, dragons, others, whites, and they're all coming south to Winterfell or north.
And Jojen is saying it's Bran's responsibility to take charge of this site, and he's kind of hijacking what Bran has seen in his sleep. And the shock of this, the sudden violation of intimacy in what had been a pleasant scene, also helps explain Bran's negative reaction to Jojen's questioning. But Bran also doesn't like this line of questioning because it means he's failed at keeping his shit together. Like, Mira notes that his dreams are the subject of gossip around the castle, and I get the feeling that Bran might not have known that, and it's embarrassing for him. Above all, though, Bran is refusing Jojen's call to action because his dreaming visions are inextricably linked in his mind to not only the Heart of Winter, but the terrible injury that preceded those visions, his fall. In the grand tradition of shamanic figures like Bran, the injury may have made his powers possible. So for Bran, the flight is forever shadowed by the fall. He once more takes refuge in the political world, insisting that as Prince of Winterfell, he doesn't have to talk about his dreams. But Jojen utterly disarms him by exposing the truth. Bran falls every night, and not talking about it doesn't help. Proclaiming you're the Prince of Winterfell doesn't help. As with every hero, he has to bring the dark into the light and deal with both at once, not just one at a time. But Bran is traumatized by his fall, and so even as part of him reaches forward eagerly for the enlightenment and adventure Jojen is offering him, the rest of him reacts like he's just touched a hot stove. And the direwolves pick up on that. And here's where we get the payoff to the duel between Mira and Summer that started the chapter, and Mira noting that the direwolves have proven happy to shed blood in defense of their Starklings. The great irony here is that even as the surface tension of this scene comes from the Reeds being endangered, there's an underlying tension wherein the wolves' anger proves Jojen right and Bran wrong. Bran is making the wolves angry because he has superpowers. Like, Bran insists that Jojen is making the wolves angry, but what kind of sense does that make? They don't speak the common tongue. They're wolves. The fact that even Shaggy Dog, with whom Bran is not otherwise bonded, acts out Bran's anger here speaks to both Bran's growing warg powers and also how Jojen has just reached past all of his defenses to leave him completely vulnerable. And while Mira, who is the most grounded human in this scene between two infant gods and two magic wolves, is terrified of the large angry dogs like you or I would be, Jojen is not scared of Summer and Shaggy Dog because his sacred knowledge has transformed him so deeply. He knows how and when and where he will die. Think about that. Think about what that would do to you day by day. Think about how that would alter your relationship to everyone and everything in your life. We see the impact of it in basically every scene in which Jojen appears, but we get a perfect microcosm of it here, in which he stares at like this slavering monster coming at him and goes, that's interesting. Jojen has completely suppressed the survival instinct that connects us to the animal kingdom. He is other. What will Bran be in the end? And then you have Mira there, and Mira's role in the proceedings is interesting. Obviously, most of this chapter revolves around Bran, Jojen, Maester Luwin, Bloodraven in the background. But Mira's important, because on one hand, she repeatedly backs up Jojen's narrative, both in this chapter and in Bran 5. She's always nodding along and saying, yep, Jojen's right about that. Yep, Jojen's right about that. But she also pokes holes in that narrative. Not out of like disbelief like Maester Luwin, but just out of terror and despair at what magic has done to her little brother and will do in the future. Maybe my favorite part of the chapter is this exchange. My brother has the green sight, said Mira. He dreams things that haven't happened, but sometimes they do. There is no sometimes, Mira. A look passed between them, him sad, her defiant. We just understand so much about these two and their dynamic from so few words there. Mira wants to believe that the green dreams only sometimes come true, so as to preserve a slender hope that Jojen might be wrong about how and when and where he dies. But Jojen shoots back that there is no exit. There's no wiggle room around the dictates of destiny. The future may reveal itself to us in uncertain form. It's the mists of dream and prophecy. But our inability to perceive the pattern doesn't change the existence of the pattern. Jojen Reed is a doomed supporting character in the story of Brandon Stark, protagonist of reality, and there is nothing Jojen, nor Mira, nor even Bran can do about that. So while Jojen shows Bran the possibilities of power, I also think he's there to show the pitfalls. He's also there to show Bran that sorcery is a sword without a hilt, and there is no safe way to wield it.
He's Dr. Manhattan, and at some point, Bran is likely going to assume a similar role in knowing the past, present, and future, as Jojen says. Bran, in the fullness of his power, As Jojen states, we'll be able to see the heart tree of Winterfell in its acorn form in its current state, and as a stump thousands of years down there, hundreds of years down the road from now. That's a power that is terrific and terrible and awful and amazing and all of those things wrapped in and of itself. And I think too, like when we're talking about this power of greensight and this power of prophecy, it really shapes how these characters are interacting and how they are perceiving the world around them. Like I was thinking about this, like when Mira tells Jojen that he needs to like climb up the tree and he needs to escape, and just like, this is not the day I die. Well, it's not the day that you die because you climbed up the tree, right? It's
exactly.
It's like these ways that George writes these narratives, which are really like Alan Moore-esque in terms of how different things come about. Like from the recent Watchmen series, probably my favorite episode from the HBO series is, not to do too much spoilers, but it's the penultimate episode where Dr. Manhattan, I guess I'll spoil that part of it, talks about how there's no changing of the future, and he ends up doing the things that he is predestined to do, that destiny has taught him to do. Jojen is doing the same thing, going from Greywater Watch up to Winterfell because he has been predestined to do so, but he is still taking those steps to make his way to Winterfell, to go with Bran from Winterfell up to the Wall and to the true north, to the Three-Eyed Crow's cave. But that's the mystic character in the story. There's also a skeptical character. There's also the character of the educated mind that has a much more agnostic outlook in terms of how magic operates. And that is Maester Luwin. And Maester Luwin is a great contrast to Jojen Reed, both because he presents a different alternative to what Jojen is presenting to Bran, but also because he is so wrong at the end of this chapter.
There are two halves of the whole, and I love how swiftly George moves Bran along here. As soon as he's done with the reads, he reaches out for reassurance from Maester Luwin, and that dynamic defines the chapter. Bran 4 starts with a duel, because the chapter as a whole is a duel, not between Mira and Summer, but between Jojen and Luwin. The Maester and the Dreamer never face off directly, like Crescent and Melisandre did in the prologue, but their worldviews come into conflict over Bran's soul. Jojen directly challenges Luwin's sleeping draught, Luwin's idea of dreams, Luwin's conception of Bran as prince in Stark and Winterfell. In Jojen's view in this chapter, Luwin has fundamentally misunderstood what Bran's role in the world is, and indeed what it is the Starks in Winterfell are here to do. So Bran is caught between mentors, sorceress and secular, new and old, and he's kind of worried the new one might be right. Jojen's making some points. And if you look at the structure of Bran's A Clash of Kings arc, this is a good time for questioning, because this is his central chapter in the book, 4th out of 7. His first chapter in A Clash of Kings was concerned with childish things, petulance, Rickon, the Walder's Fray, wolf howls. His last one in the book, the very last chapter in the book, is concerned with putting away childish things, walking away from Winterfell, even as he reaffirms its eternal strength, broken, not dead, just like me. Here, in the middle of his arc in the book, his two halves square off, just like Stannis and Renly will square off at Storm's End a few chapters from now. This is a sensible thing to do in the middle of a book. The Godswood was an oasis that is now violated by Jojen's challenge. So Bran takes refuge in Luwin's turret, which, as he said, is one of his favorite places in Winterfell. If the Godswood is the heart of magic in Winterfell, the Maester's turret is a font of rationality and skepticism. But, especially in Bran chapters, George loves similarities under surface differences. The Ravens, as Bran says, love both places, hinting that Bloodraven and Bran will connect these worlds. Both places are untidy, covered in like layers of time. There's leaves in the Godswood, paper in the turret, just these like sedimentary layers of information and time. And above all, both settings are tributes to wisdom. And wisdom is perhaps what A Clash of Kings Bran 4 is about, more than anything else. After all, as George immediately notes, this is where Bran goes for lessons, and he attends those lessons with not only his baby brother Rickon, but also the Walder's Fray. So you see that the magical and political poles within Winterfell are clearly established. We know how Jojen has deconstructed Luwin's worldview in this chapter. So what will Luwin make of Jojen's when Bran comes to him and says Jojen says he can dream the future? Luwin moves in two directions at once. On the one hand, he does acknowledge that buried in the past, yes, there is evidence of the astral journeys of which Jojen speaks. Beyond just prescient dreaming, the Greenseers of the Children could apparently see through the weirwoods and control animals. Even before coming back, having read A Dance with Dragons, you can see the clear parallels with Bran's own developing powers in this book. The fact that he sees dreams associated with the tree, the fact that he's dreaming inside Summer. On the other hand, Maester Luwin, being the skeptic, being the rationalist, is demurring and deferring and hedging his bets throughout this scene. He's stressing words like claimed and supposedly a lot. The secular political world wins over the next generation by framing the magical religious side of things not entirely as a fraud, but as a bad bet. There's just too much uncertainty and wishful thinking there, kid. You're probably going to get screwed over. Now, we as readers know that magic is real, and Bran has a part to play in that world, but Luwin doesn't know about Melisandre or Dany's dragons, and there is some logic to his reminder that, hey, most of Bran and Rickon's dreams have not come true. Equally important, though, is what Luwin says in this scene, is what he does not say. He does not dismiss magic's existence. He does not accuse Jojen of being a conscious fraud, and he does not lash out angrily at Bran for interrupting his work with this foolishness. In part, of course, this is because of the Game of Thrones. Luwin is a fine practitioner of it. This is the political world to which Luwin belongs. He doesn't want to overstep the line with Robb's heir, the Prince of Winterfell, nor with the Reeds of Greywater Watch, Ned's family friends, so he's being judicious with his phrasing about what he thinks of all this. But it's also because Luwin isn't just a cutout figure with the word atheism written on him in crayon. He's not just an archetype. He is humanized, just as Jojen was earlier. In both cases, you can see every word and action shaped by their worldviews and their backstories. Luwin loves Bran deeply, like his own son, a possibility he surrendered when he dedicated himself to the world the Citadel is trying to build. He's not just trying to get rid of Bran in the moment or force him to abandon his curiosity. Luwin sincerely wants Bran to engage with the world in a way that won't break his heart. And he is so concerned about that because it happened to him. He turns to the chain around his neck as a useful metaphor, just like with Jon and Maester Aemon back in Book 1. Jon emphasized the full sweep of the metals representing all the peoples of the realm, and Bran echoes him in this chapter. But Luwin has one particular link in mind, one that seems to stand out for the rest, one that not every Maester has. Valyrian steel. A synecdoche of magic, higher power, the fiery ladder. And of course Luwin has one of those. That's why he had obsidian arrowheads clanging around his turret back in Book 1. It turns out that when Luwin was a boy, he was a lot like Bran, caught up in stories and dreams, wondering if they might be made real, wondering if magic was real. But for him, as he says, the spells didn't work. The stories were a lie. And Luwin internalized this disappointment as an acceptance that material reality is all there is. Magic for him, and probably religion too, is a parlor trick, a rose pulled from an ear, as he puts it. He thinks of mages and warlocks as pretenders, agreeing with Zerazo and Daxos from last week. And Luwin just wants to save Bran from going through that same disappointment. But what really fleshes him out as a character and a person is he doesn't just pretend that his more secular wisdom is going to neatly fill all the holes inside Bran. He doesn't pretend he has all the answers to Bran's questions. And I got to read this passage in full because it's so beautiful. Oh, to be sure, there is much we do not understand. The years pass in their hundreds and their thousands. What does any man see of life but a few summers, a few winters? We look at mountains and call them eternal, and so they seem. But in the course of time, mountains rise and fall, rivers change their courses, stars fall from the sky, and great cities sink beneath the sea. Even gods die, we think. Everything changes. And that's one of the major themes, not only of Bran's plot in A Clash of Kings, but the story as a whole. Everything changes. Everything dies. The only constant is transformation. You die twice, really. The first death comes when you contemplate your own mortality for the first time. Jojen is an extreme, fantastical version of that because of his prophecies, but even mundane characters like Luwin face down awareness of their own mortality. Everyone has to, from kings to beggars. It's one of the few things we all have in common. We all die. The first conscious act of magic we saw a human engage in this story was Dany with Mirri Maz Duur in A Game of Thrones. And what was she trying to do? Defy death. Defy death in the name of love. If magic and religion in this universe at their twinned cores promise the defiance of death, the transcendence of mortal flesh through belief in the will to power, then what Luwin is saying is that magic and religion can't keep the promise to defy death because they too are mortal. They too will die. Even gods die. Even magic has died. Valyria was the last ember, and Valyria is gone. Put aside these childish things, my adopted son, Luwin is saying, and accept the real-world tools of being a man like I did. And yes, we can point out that Luwin is very much wrong on the specifics of this. Jojen really does have prophetic dreams. Bran really is the chosen one. Dragons are back. A living shadow is about to kill a king, and then a faceless man kills another one, etc., etc. But Luwin's larger philosophical point about the dialectics at work in his universe is what lends this scene its depth, and that is harder to refute. Because when we finally meet the Children of the Forest in A Dance with Dragons, when we finally realize they're still around, they basically concede the argument to Luwin. In that speech you quoted earlier, they concede that, yeah, in the world that men have made, there is no room for us. In the political world, in the magical world, we are all just so fucking small in the sweep of time. Tides of war and sorcery that are world-shaking for one generation will be a song at best a dozen generations down the line. How many adults in this series are living with their ghosts, passing them on to their children, an army of zombies conquering the living from within? In this light, A Clash of Kings specifically emerges less as a story about the political and magical worlds fighting each other for prominence, and more a story about how they both reflect different aspects of the same struggle to face down the Grim Reaper. And that is what allows this mentor v mentor duel in this chapter to contribute so well to Bran's coming of age. Because secular or spiritual, his mentors are both talking about the same things: growth, truth, death. Wisdom and maturation in the face of death is, again, the whole point of the hero's journey. And Bran must learn from both mentors in order to gain that all-important wisdom. And on reread, Luwin's line about how green sight is just another sort of knowledge, which for him is just like he's trying to, paper over Bran's points. But for me, that line stood out to me as so representative of Bran's story and George's outlook. It's all just different kinds of knowledge. So this chapter concludes not with a clean victory for one side or the other, political trumps magical, magical trumps political. It's not that. It's a bittersweet mingling of the two. Mir comes back to tell Bran that he must decide for his own reasons. And his own reasons, as always, come back to the songs and stories in his head. Come back to Bran as the fantasy reader, lost in the idea of what his life was going to be and how all those dreams were broken by the fall. And it's so devastating how George does this, because at first, Bran is reassured by Luwin. Okay, no danger, no threat, no supernatural spookiness. The world is what I thought it was. And then he thinks about it. And then as the chapter ends, the disappointment sets in. He goes, well, but wait a minute. If magic was real, if the songs and stories were real, maybe I could get back the life I wanted. Maybe I could erase the fall. Maybe I could get my own personal miracle, a one-time exception to the stony secular laws that Luwin says shape the world. It's like when Arya asks Thoros, could you bring back a man who lost his head not 6 times, just once? That's the temptation, more than anything. More than adventure, more than giving up the daily grind of being a prince, Bran wants his innocence back. He wants his childhood dreams back. He wants to be a knight. And so we see the potency of all these ingredients colliding: backstory and big picture, political and magical, all of it propelling our protagonist forward. It's great stuff. Like, I know these middle Bran chapters in The Clash of Kings aren't an obvious highlight of the book, like the Battle of Blackwater or the House of the Undying, but I really love them. I think every aspect of them is just beautiful.
Yes, they are absolutely beautiful. And what you're saying is really powerful stuff. Ultimately, we die twice. I think that's something that's worth keeping in mind, the realization that we have a finite end at some point in the future, and actually experiencing that end, that finite point at the end of our story. And I think, George has talked about stories and had their impact and how different archetypal roles are fulfilled by characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, and how they represent different types of storytelling devices that he uses. But, season 8 concludes with Tyrion awkwardly telling the council at the end that who has a better story than Bran Stark, and that's why he needs to become the king of Westeros. And really, what more can we ask for at the end of our own lives? That our own story lives on, and that we have the ability to progress beyond this mortal flesh and into something that lasts forever. Stories. And, stories can be a way that we can keep ourselves from truth, as has been a major point in A Song of Ice and Fire. The idea of the long night and the others coming and everything like that has faded from being reality, a historical event, to being a legend. It's all legendary. But sometimes legends are true, and sometimes a legend will have a lot of power if it's forgotten or if it's remembered more prominently. Hopefully it's remembered. And that's really what ultimately is going for Bran. I think Bran will be remembered, and us and our own lives, we will fade. And I know that there's a great sad line that within like 3 generations, like, you will be forgotten. The last person who ever knew you will fade away from existence. And all that's left is stories. And that's sad. And it's also great stuff at the same time, and great stuff as well that you're talking about. It's amazing. It's a great chapter, man.
Beautifully said, sir. I think it's such a great chapter because it brings such deep, bittersweet human thoughts out of you. And that's, again, it's not a fireworks display like some of the other much loved parts of this book, but I think at a rich human level, this is some of the best stuff.
It absolutely is. So I think that about wraps up for the depth portion of this podcast. To transition a bit to foreshadowing and groundwork for this episode. So this, we kind of like skipped over this, or we kind of paper over a little bit. But there's one little chunk of Northern politics that we do get in this chapter, and it's super important because it's going to influence the rest of how Bran's Winterfell Clash of Kings arc works, and really how the A Dance with Dragons Northern storyline gets kind of meted out. We learn that Ramsay Snow has kidnapped Lady Hornwood and forced her to marry him in order to gain control of her land. And the Manderleys are also fighting and have seized Castle Hornwood. And this is really going to play out in Bran 5, in which the bastard of Bolton, Reek, pays for his crimes, or does he? Who pays for the crimes in this story? It's one of the most confusing aspects of A Clash of Kings, but we will definitely be unpacking that come Bran 5.
Everyone finds that twist too confusing, but I love it. The Ramsay Reek twist is one of my favorite twists in the whole story, especially given the layers it takes on when you come back after Theon's dance chapters. And yes, we do get like this kind of like segregated paragraph that's just about politics in this chapter that's much more about magic and big themes. And the interesting part of it is that Sir Roderick is just as pissed at Wyman Manderley as he is at Ramsay, because Wyman Manderley, once he saw Ramsay break into King's Peace, he thought, oh, well, may as well cross the border and take the castle. And I love how George does it, because it shows you while Ramsay is indeed a uniquely bad actor, there's no really saintly character keeping the peace in the North right now. That this vacuum is there because Robb and so many of his men are in the South, and Wyman is willing to take advantage of that. And even though he's not a monster like Ramsay, he's also not really concerned for the well-being of Lady Hornwood, and he is out for his own house's interest above all else. And I like how George frames that.
I like that too.
So Luwin's story about trying his hand at the, quote, higher mysteries gets further developed in A Feast for Crows, when we learn about how the Citadel demands that would-be maesters try and fail to light glass candles in order to convince them that magic is dead, which I love because it's such a flex, but also such a weakness and a reveal of fear that, like, we got to make sure we're constantly like on the watch to make sure magic's not coming back, and none of our own people are good at magic. We got to make sure we stamp this out, which definitely lines up with what Marwyn the Mage has to say about how the Archmaesters see the world.
The glass candles are burning, as what opens up the Feast for Crows prologue. I don't know if it opens up, but it's definitely one of those metal moments, as you were indicating with your little devil sign there. But the thing I wonder about is whether Marwyn has a Valyrian steel link. I would have to imagine he probably does, given his fascination with magic and with that mystical side of learning. And this is kind of a crazy idea, but I do wonder, we don't know the exact age of Marwyn the Mage, but mayhaps he and Luwin were co-students at the Citadel themselves, and Luwin went away being a skeptic of magic, and Marwyn went away from the Citadel being like, this shit is real. It's fucking real, guys, and we need to like get ahead of it before it gets ahead of us.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's whether Marwyn might have been already established when Luwin got there, and then Luwin like maybe ran the other way and like saw Marwyn as like a cautionary tale, like, ooh, I don't want to end up like that guy.
Yeah, I can completely agree why you might not want to end up like Marwyn, but at the same time, I kind of do want to end up like Marwyn at the same time. It's kind of a dual thing. So, anyways, the third piece of foreshadowing: the end of Bran's fourth chapter, and he would never walk, nor fly, nor be a knight. That's very deliberately paralleled by George come A Dance with Dragons in Bran's second chapter, when Bran finally meets with the Three-Eyed Crow, when the Three-Eyed Crow tells him, "You will never walk again, Bran," the Pale Lips promised, "but you will fly." And it's a really great build-up that George integrates into Bran's story, and that he's consistently reflecting on that dream from A Game of Thrones of the Three-Eyed Crow calling him to fly, and how the first flying starts with a fall, and finally having it revealed at the end that he will fly. But it's, like a lot of these prophetic things that are going on in this chapter and throughout Bran's arc and what Jojen tells him, flying for Bran is probably not going to be him actually soaring through the air Peter Pan style, but more likely being, skin changing the ravens and flying through them. It's
another great bittersweet moment when Bran has gone all in on his magical powers because he thinks he can rewind the clock. He thinks he can get his childhood dreams back. And then Bloodraven tells him, no, kid, that was never the deal. You're moving on to something much bigger, but also something that requires you to leave everything behind. As he says, the people in his family that meant so much to him, the people with whom and against whom he fought wars in his youth, they're all gone. And the same is true for Bran, and Bran has to let go. And that's that, there's a lot of possibility in that, but also a lot of loss and a lot of sorrow. Very, very, very much rooted in the emotions of this chapter.
Absolutely.
And so many of the images and concepts in this chapter, crows, eyes, flight, dreams, gods dying, men as meat, the grasping warlocks of the East, the quote, ember of magic that was Valyria, All of this comes back later to circle in a more horrific apocalyptic manner around Euron Greyjoy, the Crow's Eye. And this sets up Euron as the photo negative of Bran, the antagonist to his protagonist, that he's going through like the same rituals, the same traditions and images, but ending up just a monster at the end of it instead of the ideal Arthurian protagonist. And I think, one way I'd like to talk about Euron for people who aren't interested in him as a character or kind of confused by him is think of him as evil Bran. Think of him as a version of Bran who went through all this, but like had possessing Hodor, like where that's Bran's worst sin. Like that would be like it would be barely in the top 10 for Euron.
Yeah, that Euron is it's fascinating to consider Bloodraven attempting to find his protege. I get the impression from this chapter that Bloodraven attempted to potentially choose Jojen as well as a potential protege too, because he appeared to him when he was in his sickness, when he had the Greywater fever. I don't know how Bloodraven or the Three-Eyed Crow appeared to Euron, whether Euron was desperately sick at one point in his childhood and that's when he appeared to him. And we also see too in the form of Sweet Robin, everyone's favorite Azor Ahai character, or at least our Hand of the King Wolf and Zach's favorite Azor Ahai figure, that his shaking sickness was likely the method that Bloodraven, the Three-Eyed Crow / Bloodraven, appeared to Bran, or rather appear to him. So does the people have to be have a near-death experience in order for them to appear to them? Is that how Bloodraven has attempted to sort through the potential heroes of the story, that his proteges, the people who are going to succeed him at his cave? I don't know.
Those are excellent questions. And we'll hopefully, I would love to get more details, of course, about Euron and Bloodraven. I do hope that gets explicitly revealed at length. I will lap up any detail, any scrap from the table in that regard. One final bit of foreshadowing here has to do with the prophecy at the end that Jojen had that Mira reveals to Bran. This is one of the more like kind of blunt and simple prophetic setups. Like it immediately gets answered explicitly in the text. Bran thinks, oh, this is the prophecy, basically, when we get to Bran 5. So not much mystery here. It's again, Jojen, as far as these magical herald figures go, Jojen is one of the more straightforward. And I think that's deliberate on George's part because, again, Jojen is trying to get Bran to actively get involved.
Right. And it's that same kind of element of fear that Bran is experiencing this chapter. Like when he hears word that Robb Stark has won a great victory out at Oxcross and is besieging all these castles across the Westerlands, he doesn't feel triumphant at all. This should be a moment where he's like, fuck yeah, House Stark winning the War of the Five Kings. Hell yeah. But instead he's like, God, like I'm scared for my brother's life, and he has every reason to be scared for his brother's life. Meanwhile, the Freys are going to learn that Sir Stevron Frey is dead. So sad. Sorry, Sevron.
I love their reaction when they just like pull out their little org chart of the Frey family tree and goes, okay, who's next? Is it him? Is it him? And then everyone else in the room goes, your relative just died. And they go, oh yeah, we're very sad. Anyway, back to the org chart. I love the phrase. But yeah, it's a very, very direct payoff because George is not really interested in the mystery of the prophecies as far as Jojen is concerned. It's more about getting Bran to accept it and move on to the next step.
Absolutely. So yeah, take it away, sir.
Well, I just wanted to say we have a very obvious discussion topic for this episode. I think, Jeff was teasing it a couple times throughout the episode. I think you all know where we're going with this. We're going to prove that the Three-Eyed Crow absolutely, positively is 100% Old Nan. Take it away, Jeff. Take it away, I say.
No.
Three-Eyed Crow, Old Nan. Give me your bullet points.
Oh, no. I mean, yeah, no. Okay, so... Welcome back to our long overdue Your Theory is Bad and You Are Ugly segment of this podcast. I mean, if you guys remember, so this is our 100th episode, so we have to like take it back to our roots, right? When we first started this episode, our very first episode about the prologue for Game of Thrones was about the others are good or misunderstood. That's a theory that some people apparently believe in this fandom for some fucking unknown reason. And then we also did from Bran's first chapter, Robert's Rebellion was built on a lie, which got a little bit of credence from the show Game of Thrones. You might have seen it once or twice. I don't know. And then we did The House with the Red Door is Not in Bravos in our first Dany episode. And now we return to the dawn of time on our 100th episode to bring back an oldie, yet a goodie. Old Nan is Bloodraven. Or I'm just going to make it more general than that. Bloodraven is not the Three-Eyed Crow. So this theory, for whatever reason, will not fucking die. I don't understand why this theory just exists. And for me, I'm one of the things I do is I'm a moderator from the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit, and one of the things I've noticed in
the Lord's work, truly.
Yes, Lord's work, truly indeed. But one of the things I've noticed recently is that this theory has kind of come back. Like I feel like there's kind of different waves of different bad theories that end up kind of coming back into vogue, and this one currently is in vogue there. So for me to be extremely fair, I'm going to tell you all of the points that are sort of plausible why Bloodraven is not the three-eyed crow, because I'm so fair. We're both fair. We're not fair at all. We're fucking.
Why would we be? How boring.
It would be so boring for us to be fair. So, couple bullet points. So, some of these people who believe this theory think that Bran's theory about a crow is not a raven and all crows are liars is proving that Bloodraven is not a crow because he's a raven, and that's important for these people. Okay. When Bran later in the Dance with Dragons, in his second chapter, when he asks if Bloodraven is a three-eyed crow, Bloodraven says, crow? The pale lord's voice was dry. His lips moved slowly as if he had forgotten how to form words. Once I, black of garb and black of blood. So Bloodraven, not knowing that Bran is talking about what Bran is talking about, means that he's not the three-eyed crow. Of course. What? And during Bran's dream from the Game of Thrones, Bran asked whether the three-eyed crow is really a crow. So it can't be that Bloodraven doesn't think Bran is asking if he's a member of the Night's Watch back in the Game of Thrones and it's dragons, right? I'm looking at you. It can't also be that the form the person is sending the dreams is obscured from the sender, right? Wait a minute. A wooden face, corpse white. Was this the enemy? 1,000 red eyes floated in the rising flames. He sees me. Beside him, a boy with a wolf's face threw back his head and howled. And that's from Melisandre's one and only chapter from A Dance of Dragons, where she is seeing a vision in the flames of likely almost entirely 100% Bloodraven and Bran Stark. Does Bran have the face of a wolf in actuality? No. Does Bloodraven actually have 1,000 eyes and one in reality? No. Okay. It can't also be that Bloodraven's a bit dull of speech, not having spoken to someone or anyone using his lips and voice in like 61 fucking years? No, of course not. It has to be that Bloodraven is not the three-eyed crow. Okay, next point that I see every once in a while. In Bran's 5th chapter, the next one that's coming up, Bran reveals to Jojen Reed that there's sometimes another presence in his dreams. Here's what Bran says. And there's dreams where the crow comes and tells me to fly. Sometimes the tree is in those dreams too, calling my name. I mean, that's interesting that the three-eyed crow could take on more forms than simply a crow, but I don't know why that shows us that Bloodraven is not the three-eyed crow and also potentially occupying the space of the weirwood tree and whatever. Look, it's so goddamn dubious that there's some versions, as Emmett was alluding to, that old Nan is the three-eyed crow, right? She's the one that's sending all these visions to Bran because she's a storyteller. She introduces him to the others in these stories, right? So they must be the same character. No, it's so dubious that this theory has... I can't even believe this. So I actually read up on this stuff. So I did my research. I did it because I felt like I owed at least a modicum of fairness to this theory. So there's one variation of this theory which has it that the menace that Bran feels when the Ironborn take Winterfell in his 6th chapter is tied to old Nan opening and closing her toothless mouth instead of, to the fucking Ironborn who are menacing everyone after just taking Winterfell. My God, this theory is just the fucking worst.
Well, Jeff, I'm going to cut you off before you have a heart attack. You have children to think of, sir. But yeah, that last one is very indicative of the problem here, which is this: these are people passing around like 2 sentences of bolded text and saying, look, these line up. And it's like, no, you have to read the chapter and get a sense of the mood in the room, and then you'll clearly see what's being talked about. And same with all the evidence, quote unquote, that you were talking about. Like, oh, look, he has dreams of both a tree and a crow, so they have to be 2 different people. Like, that's so painfully literal as a way of thinking about these inherently abstract, loose, fluid visions. Like, these are different images swirling into each other constantly. Bran is sometimes a wolf in these dreams. Sometimes he's a tree. Jon has a dream of him as a tree. As you say, Bloodraven might not even know half the time what the other person is seeing. And also, yeah, Bloodraven is like 1,000 years old and tripping his mind off constantly and is in a frozen, weird little fort at the top of the world. Like, maybe he's not the most coherent guy moment to moment. Maybe he's just confused when Bran's talking to him. I think that's much more likely than there's a whole other mentor character hidden from us this whole time for reasons, and that reveal, let me tell you, that's going to be something. Like, it's just a modicum of common sense required here.
Right. It's so commonsensical that the three-eyed crow is Bloodraven. It doesn't make sense that you would have so much narrative thrown in the Dunk and Egg stories to Bloodraven, starting in the Sworn Sword and going on into the Mystery Knight and likely proceeding on to the different Dunk and Egg stories, which are going to feature Bloodraven. Why are you introducing this major supporting character unless you plan to have him be a major part of the story for going forward? Now, look, I get it that not every single major character in the Dunk and Egg stories is going to have a direct appearance in A Song of Ice and Fire. And yet...
Bloodraven did, so
right.
I think he's important. But so, I mean, so to again be scrupulously fair as we are in the NotACast, what is the direct evidence for Bloodraven being the three-eyed crow? Let's not just argue against their terrible theories. Why do we say so authoritatively that Bloodraven is the three-eyed crow?
Well, I would start with saying this. The Dance with Dragons appendix states, and I'm quoting from Fool, the three-eyed crow, also called the last Greenseer, sorcerer and dreamwalker, once a man of the Night's Watch named Brynden, now more tree than man. Obviously talking about Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, right? That's what he's talking about there. No, come on, guys. Brynden Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers is who is in that. And then we have the World of Ice and Fire app, officially authorized by George R. Martin and created by Elio and Linda submitting hundreds of questions to George R. Martin back in 2012. Yes, there's a whole, not a blog post about this. Identifies the three-eyed crow as Bloodraven, in which it says, after finding the last enclave of the Children of the Forest, Bran is led to the last Greenseer, the three-eyed crow of his dreams, not a child of the forest, but Brynden Rivers, once known as Bloodraven. Okay. We gotten that so far. Finally, final piece of evidence. This is all extra textual. So this is stuff if you are our patrons, you can take a look at the show notes. I've linked everything on there. Elio Garcia Jr. once asked George directly about the three-eyed crow as Bloodraven, in which Elio is recounting this conversation back from a recap from season 4 where the three-eyed raven in the show appears. And so Elio says, I recall asking George when I interviewed him, did he always know that the three-eyed crow was Bloodraven? ? His answer was that he always knew that the three-eyed crow would be tied to the Targaryens. He didn't always have the specifics of how. So what Ellie is talking about, that what George is talking about, is that he didn't always have the Blackfires and Bloodraven and all these different characters from the outset of writing a Game of Thrones. These came after writing a Game of Thrones, likely after writing a Clash of Kings, between Clash and Storm, because as Stephen Atwell talked about in his great essay about Dunk and Egg, which you guys should all read, from the meta side, we know that the Blackfires don't really start appearing in the narrative until A Storm of Swords, where Stannis and Catelyn and Jaime and different characters mention the Blackfires for the first time. And Brynden Rivers as a character himself his first appearance is in The Sworn Sword by name. And again, it's also in A Dance with Dragons too. So that's all like extra textual stuff. But in this chapter 2, there's, Jojen talks about the three-eyed crow and where the three-eyed crow is located. And I feel like that should be like a pretty fucking large piece of evidence about why we should discount all theories that Old Nan or someone at Winterfell is the three-eyed crow.
What's the motive here exactly? Like, what broke down? Why is Bloodraven trying to get Bran there if he's not the three-eyed crow? Why isn't the three-eyed crow jumping back into Bran's dreams going, no, don't stop, don't go that way. That's not where I am at all. Like, what? There's no real breakdown here to exploit. And more importantly, there's nothing to be gained from this. Like, it's the same reason Quentin's dead, because Quentin's done. There's nothing more interesting to be told. There's no other role for him. He would just be an unnecessary complication. He would just be, oh, I'm still alive. And everyone would go, now what? And be like, And same deal here. This makes the story more complicated, not less. And I think that's generally a sign of bad theories. Like, I know a lot of my Euron theorizing tends to go over the top. But overall, in a good way. Well, thank you, sir. But my point is just like Euron exists as this kind of weird seeming complication in the text, and everything I've tried to write about Euron is an attempt to explain why he's there at all, and so make the story make more sense. But these theories make the story make less sense, and that's partially why they're bad. Exactly, and like the revelation that the three-eyed crow is Bloodraven is a extraordinarily, in my mind, I guess it's not to everyone seemingly, but is an extraordinarily satisfying reveal in the story. And that's ultimately what mysteries are supposed to feed into. Satisfying reveals for the character. Jon's parentage, who his parents were, is intended to be a satisfying yet melancholy beat in Jon's story, that he's always not been a bastard of Winterfell. He's never been Ned Stark's son. That's sad. It's melancholy. At the same time, it adds a level of meaning to why Ned Stark was acting the way that he was. Bloodraven being the three-eyed crow adds a level of meaning. It layers what is happening in Bran's story to make it much more compelling. It fuses the history together. In this chapter, we're talking about how Jojen is telling Bran how he could see through the different views of history through his ability to become a warg and a greenseer. And Bloodraven is that vantage point into the past of talking about the fluid side of the narrative, how the narrative and history flow together and form into this great guy in the form of Bran Stark, future King of Westeros. And it's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's satisfying. It's great.
any other theories that are not Bloodraven are not satisfying. They're not great. They're shitty. They're awful. They're terrible. They're fucking horrible. And why would Old Nan be the three-eyed crow and not, as Travis has said in the chats for our live stream? So if you guys are listening to this, check out the live stream. As said in the past, why is Bloodraven not the three-eyed crow not sending out a message? Please fucking rescue me at the Dreadfort. I'm here. Please, God, get me out of God damn it, please. But no, instead, the three-eyed crow is Bloodraven. It's satisfying. It's wonderful. I love it. It makes perfect sense, and it's the way that George does reveals in A Song of Ice and Fire.
And it's so nice to go back to our old segment of terrible theories, getting this nostalgia going for those early episodes, sir. So thank you so much for doing 100 episodes with me.
Thank you, man, and thank you. Just we have our moments of love at the end of some of these episodes, and I just have to say that it's a genuine pleasure to do these every single week, and I have the chance to read through your stuff before anyone else does. And I'm always like, feel like I have my losing hair, because I'm losing hair, my minimal hair being blown back every single time at your insights. But more than looking at your insights, it's a pleasure to call you my friend. And that's
likewise,
makes me do this as a friend of mine. And for you guys who are listening to us, you're friends at some level to us as well. And we really appreciate all you guys who've contributed your ears and your eyes if you're watching us. And it's great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So I think that about wraps us up for this analysis of A Clash of Kings Brand 4. For you folks who are sticking around for the live stream, we'll take a few questions and chat with you guys for a little while, probably do, maybe 10:30, 10:45 or so. So stick around, and we're not going to be dropping off immediately after we close out this podcast episode. If you all have the chance, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean. There was a really great Apple Podcast review, which someone said that they look forward to Monday mornings now because they get to wake up and listen to us. And I was like, wow, that's really beautiful and special to me. And it makes sense. And no, that's arrogant, but it doesn't, not that it makes sense. It makes like heart sense to me. It makes me feel things.
Absolutely. So check out our Patreon at patreon.com/NotACast ASOIAF. Follow us on Twitter at NotACast ASOIAF, or shoot us an email at NotACastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at Port Quentin on Twitter or at PortQuentin.com.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsofIceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon: Lord of the Squishers and Warden of the Deep, Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Eastwood of Introvert Isle, Septon Maribald, the Shoeless Sage, Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood, Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets, Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys and Lady of Jameson, Lady Britt, Bastard Mistress of Harrenhal, Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood, Sir Tim, the Knight who was guided by voices, Sir Courtenay, what did the five-finger say to the face Penrose, Lady Dillsdale, the Star Spear of Crescent Hill, Sir Way of Course, Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore, Lord Mark Connington, heir to Griffin's Roost, Lord Sam Kay, Sir Michael Mertens, Wisdom Bedjacott, Alchemist of Sets and Quanta, Mage of the Arts of Boole and De Morgan, and Lady Heather. Thank you so much to all our high lords and ladies.
Absolutely, folks. Thank you very, very much for supporting us. It means a lot every single week to be shouting out your guys' names for small counselors and for Emmett to do the high lords and ladies. It's great. So join us next week for A Clash of Kings Tyrion 7, in which Tyrion manipulates Lancel Lannister into becoming his spy and then goes to visit Shae before admitting he loves all the power he has. I mean, Emmett, why have you said that Tyrion is the protagonist for A Clash of Kings again?
Protagonist doesn't mean good guy, Jeff. But thankfully, this is another episode I don't have to do with just Jeff. We will be joined next week by our first-time guest on the NotACast, Jinx Lier. We've been looking for a chance to do an episode with Jinx for a long time, so we're so excited to get to talk with her about Shae and how George writes sex workers and how he writes about Tyrion's relationship to them. So it should be a fun, insightful episode.
It's going to be so much fun to do it with her. She's a very dear friend of both of ours, and it's going to be great to do this episode with her. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you again to our patrons for supporting us, and we will see you guys next time. Whew.
All right. So thank you folks for sticking around. If you're in the chat, we'll take a few questions and hang out with you for a bit.
Yeah. This is a good episode. It's always fun to do these Bran episodes. Because again, like Bran, I don't know why when I was doing my previous rereads, I just didn't like him as much as a point of view character. I was just kind of waiting to get to like the more interesting stuff like Blackwater, the House of the Undying, to all the Theon stuff. But I'm really loving this Bran stuff. This is great. It's fantastic. It's
on reread, he's becoming my favorite of the central cast. Honestly, I think that this page works well for it.
It really, really does.
So what do we got here?
Julie R asks, what cons are you guys going to this year?
I'll be going to Ice and Fire Con, which will be at the end of April 23rd through 26th, I think. Here, I can just put their website in the chat real quick. And then I'm going to, which is going to be great. Obviously that's the premier Song of Ice and Fire convention. A lot of great people will be there. I'll be on at least one panel with Lady Gwyn about Renly. So
Ooh.
That'll be a hoot. I love you just made my favorite noise in the world there, sir. So that should be a delight. Here, I just put their website in the chat. Ice and Fire Con's great if you haven't been before. And then I'll be at Dragon Con at the end of August, which is just, or beginning of September, whenever it ends this year, which is just a sea of madness. So good luck spotting anyone in that crowd. But yeah, so I'll be at Dragon Con in Atlanta early September.
As is my tradition since 2017, I will not be attending any conventions this year. I
would love kids.
Exactly. I would love to go to Ice and Fire Con. I think it would be great to go back. I went in 2017. It's a lot of fun. I actually met you there in the flesh, which was amazing and wonderful to actually experience you. I remember talking about
Chloe in the flesh. That's same.
There you go. Yeah, there's so many
magical nights.
Yeah, it was a legit fantastic time. So someday I hope to return back to at least Ice and Fire Con. I think I am right now as we're speaking. I haven't talked to my wife about this yet, but I am planning to go attend WorldCon in 2021, which is supposed to be in Washington, D.C., which George R. Martin will be there with, The Winds of Winter, A Dream of Spring, and 12 Duncan Egg novellas in hand.
But of course, yeah, I'm planning on going to that. So yeah, we should make that a whole thing. If we can pull it off, that'd be great.
That will be really great. So that'll be a lot of fun. All right. Samir asks, how sober will the House of the Undying episode be?
Well, on Jeff's part, sober as the breeze on the Kansas plains on the 4th of July. I can't do this. I was born psychedelic, my friends. I don't need any help. Trust me.
I've one of the things I'm doing for the new year, and really since last year's, I've significantly cut back on drinking a lot because not that I was an alcoholic necessarily, but I just for my own. Well, if I'm being completely honest, it's the reason why I've cut back on drinking is so that I can look better naked. So
right on,
it's good stuff. So
we're all trying for that.
Well,
so yeah, the house. I remember Spielberg described 2001: A Space Odyssey that he walked in sober and came out high.
Yes, I remember that for Danny 8. Yeah,
that's the House of the Undying. So we won't need any help.
Absolutely. We got a Jojen question. I'm just trying to find. There we go. Tony3483 asks, is it possible that Jojen's vision of his own death is wrong? I don't think so. I think he's very accurate of where he's going to die, what he's going to die doing. Now, the question that is a better question in my mind is that did George know from the get-go of how Jojen was going to die?
That's a better question, yeah.
I don't think so. I think that George kind of left this out there as something that he ended up gardening into Jojen being consumed as paste, most likely in my opinion, or in some other fashion, in order to spur Bran's magical ability at the Cave of the Three-Eyed Crow.
Again, Jojen is one of the more straightforward prophet characters. He's not really like Melisandre. Is that the real vision, or what is this layers? What is this could be referring to? What is she spinning? Jojen is pretty much on the can. He gets some things wrong, obviously regarding Ramsay and Brandon Rickon, but I don't think there's another twist. I think the twist is his death. I think in this case.
Yeah, I agree. Just Reds asks, as someone who graduated in high school that was so traumatically hardline physics centered, I'm really enjoying the Expanse books and show. Do you guys have any sci-fi books to recommend? This is more your question because I don't actually read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy.
I'm not much for hard sci-fi either. I mean, I just reread The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula Le Guin, which is a classic. But in terms of series, I mean, it's only the ones everyone has heard of. I still got to make my way through all the Expanse, honestly.
Which one are you on? I'm not done yet either on the Expanse.
I got bogged down in the second one. I got to go back. I'm gonna rewatch. I'm gonna rewatch the show with Chloe, make her watch it, and then hopefully that'll re-spark my interest. Colin Sandberg, just in the Hyperion books are great sci-fi. That is another a very good example. So
yeah,
correct, Colin.
I feel like in terms of sci-fi I've read a fair amount of Heinlein when I was in that phase of my life.
You don't say.
Right, exactly. It's I'm not playing to type at all. I mean, it's
it's like me saying I read Clive Barker at some point. We know
it's so true. All right, so Frank B asks, if you subscribe to the theory, how do you think Stannis is going to react to Bran's face popping up in a tree? So what Frank is referring to is that in the Theon sample chapter from The Winds of Winter, the trees start to talk, and Stannis tells him to shut the fuck up because he doesn't want to talk to trees. He's interested in telling Theon how it's going to be and how he's going to deal out swift northern justice to Theon just as soon as Theon reveals how he actually got into Winterfell. That's a very important point that Stannis needs to get a hold of. But that does leave up this great theory that I think we talked about back in Bran's second chapter in A Game of Thrones about how Bran will likely be in, or potentially be in, the Weirwood Grove that is outside of the Crofters village. And yeah, what is Stannis' reaction going to be to that? Is he going to be like, okay, what the fuck is going on with Westeros? I mean, I'm fire dreams.
I am just trying to do my job. Right. These things keep talking out of fires and trees, and I want to nap, and it's cold. I mean, that's what his reaction is going to be, and that's why I really hope this is true, because it's going to be hysterical if he gets out there in front of that tree and he's trying to execute someone, and he can't execute someone because a little boy in a tree is telling him not to. Like, that's going to make him so confused and angry. And I want it to be true for that reason alone.
It's just going to be perfect. I really hope that there is I hope the way the Winter is structured is that we don't just go from Theon's first chapter immediately to the battle, then we get the aftermath of the battle. I hope that we actually get another potential Theon or Asha chapter, most likely a Theon chapter of him going out to the Weirwood Grove. I think that would be terrific and wonderful. So we'll see what George ends up doing for the Winds of Winter next week or the week after that. There's a really good question here that I was just looking at. Oh, here we go. This one's just right up your alley. Max L asks, Euron mentions numerous times his desire for marriage, spouse, and children, having a, quote, worthy heir. In addition, there is this vision of a woman by his side from The Winds of Winter and the Forsaken. Thoughts on what this could be? This is totally up your alley. I'm just going to lean back and let you talk for about 20 minutes.
Nothing good. Nothing good. Like, when you hear about how Euron talks about his current bastards, you get the impression he's aiming for something higher, so to speak. And knowing Euron, I don't think that's just like, better bloodlines. I think it's more like something like the experiments that people were up to in Valyria, and the experiments that might have produced the others, fusing human with something that's not. I don't know if Euron wants to directly have sex with dragons, the way that the earliest Valyrians may have been doing. Wouldn't put it past him, but I think that's the kind of thing he's talking about. An heir worthy, as in like more than human, transcended. And I think the woman in the Forsaken could be any number of people. I think she's supposed to stand in for the White Walkers in that regard. So I think that's what Euron wants to produce. He wants to produce something like the kind of things that ate that poor Targaryen. Remind me, what was her name again? It's been too long since Fire and Blood. The Targaryen girl. Yeah, right. He's up to something like that, I think.
Oh, that sounds horrifying and totally up Euron's alley. Yeah, I don't think he's actually wants legitimate human heirs, so to speak. I think that's more like metaphorical of he wants his heirs to be the bringing on the mystical side of the story in the form of the worst possible fucking way it could possibly be, in the form of the others coming south.
That works. That actually makes a great deal of sense. I like that.
We'll see how it goes. All right. Lewis R asks, who do you guys think Cold Hands is? Just some random Night's Watch dude? He's not mentioned in the show, right? Yeah, no, he's not mentioned. As we talked about before, it was explicitly revealed by, sort of explicitly revealed by George R. Martin in a margin note to his editor where Anne Grohl asked him, I really think that, Cold Hands is Benjen Stark. Is that who he is? And George says, no! Exclamation points, and then circles it afterwards in red letter, of course, in red pen. So no, Cold Hands is not Benjen Stark. Benjen Stark is alive, likely, and we will have an excellent discussion about that come John's 4th and 5th chapters in A Clash of Kings, which I think we kind of talked about this, but I think we're likely going to combine those two chapters into one episode because
John 4 is kind of nothing, to be honest. So John 4 and 5 makes more sense.
Right.
But yeah, Cold Hands, I don't know. Part of me is like, he can't be important. His name is Cold Hands. Part of me refuses to accept. But you also have Patchface, who says important things. So, I mean, the sticking point with Cold Hands, as everyone brings up, is that Leaf says that the Whites killed him a long time ago, which makes it sound like, even without George's intervention, that sounds like not Benjen, and not like Waymar Royce, and not anyone else like recent from the Night's Watch. So I could see him being any number of historical figures, maybe like the original Night's King, maybe one of those Night Fort ghost stories. It could just be something completely banal, like he's one of the Raven's Teeth who came north with Bloodraven. Like they were in service to Bloodraven. So maybe they just still are. But it also just like might not matter. He might just be a body that Bloodraven and the children went, yeah, sure, why not him? Like
Right.
it might not matter who he is. He might be a rando that they are puppeteering. And this might be one case where we have picked up on the wrong mystery, like the three-eyed crow is not Bloodraven, or Ramsay didn't write the pink letter. Like we might be inventing more than there is here. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it could be just like a random Night's Watchman who went up north with Bloodraven on that final ranging when Bloodraven disappeared and it turned up as a three-eyed crow, right? You can't imagine Bloodraven went all by himself on a ranging. He had to have people with him. He was the fucking Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. So
sure,
some dude being on the journey with him would make sense to me. Being killed long ago, 61 years before the events from A Dance with Dragons feels like a
long enough, I guess,
time.
for Leaf. Leaf is how old? Doesn't she say
200 or 300 years? I can't remember.
Right, so, all right, 60. I'll take it.
It's like, whatever. I agree with you though. I don't think his identity is that important, but I do think it's something to think about, I guess.
I think the fact that he's walking around looking and feeling the way he does, I think that's the important thing. Like especially for Jon. Like I think that's what Cold Hands is for more than anything. Not necessarily a big reveal.
Right. I agree. All right. There's other good questions here. I apologize. I'm scrolling through all of your guys' excellent comments and questions.
Let me go back up and see other ones if we missed.
We'll do that one. Well, given how old the Children of the Forest are, I assume a long time ago would be longer than it would be for people. Yeah, that's a good point.
True. Mubarak asked, why is Jon reluctant to tell his Night's Watch brothers about borrowing money from the Iron Bank? Instead, he says he's going to sell the free folks' wealth for sustenance. Congrats, Demon and Chloe. Thank you very much. I don't get this. It's difficult to tell what like the Iron Bank status is for an institution like the Night's Watch. Like, would people like Bowen Marsh think this is a sure bet or like a risky foreign adventure? Like, I'm not sure what the response to what Jon is doing here would be. I think the response would probably be, how are we going to pay it back?
Right. That's immediately
knowing Bowen Marsh, especially, that's going to be the first question out of his weaselly little mouth. But
at the same time, like, Jon has the answer, but he doesn't provide it to Bowen Marsh and the other conspirators, and that they're taking all of the wildling monies and gold as they're coming south of the wall. So that's seems to be the collateral that's going to end up being part of why the Iron Bank is going to end up lending money to the Night's Watch. They have some cash in the form of all the different things that the wildlings bring south when they're coming south. But, Jon, one of Jon's big issues in A Dance with Dragons is that he doesn't communicate as best as he could and should. And often, ultimately, that ends up leading to his downfall. Not in totality, but in some level. His inability to communicate well is going to lead to his stabbing. We got a question for you.
Oh, do we?
SKNCS at Poor Quentin. I know you correctly believe that Euron was Bloodraven's protege. How much training do you think Bloodraven gave Euron? Did he go north to the cave?
I don't think so. No, I think it was the dreams, and that was it. That's all Euron talks about. There's never an indication that Euron left home as a kid. I think that would probably have come up. We see that there are the bones of 1,000 other dreamers impaled all around the spikes that Bran is falling towards in his dream in A Game of Thrones. And I'm inclined to think those people are dead. They died in their sleep. They're bones for a reason. Mm-hmm. But Euron could be somewhat kind of like failed protege, or he could be a protege who succeeded, who flew, and then Bloodraven took a closer look at him and went, "Oh, fuck." You're a sadist. What did I just do? Mm-hmm. And dropped him like a hot rock. One of those things happened, or maybe like Euron just trade Bloodraven at some point in the process. I think whatever happened though, I think it went down on the astral plane because Euron he's inconvenient. He's on a bunch of islands. It's not like Bran where he could just start walking north. I don't think he ever went to the cave.
So how do you think that's going to be revealed in The Winds of Winter? So we don't have Euron as a POV character because thank God for that.
Sadly.
Horrifying. Oh, come on. Oh, it would be great.
No,
I guess
that would be boring.
Yeah. So I have to imagine that Bran's going to play one part of it in learning from Bloodraven, depending on how many chapters are in the Three-Eyed Crow's cave before Bloodraven and Hodor end up buying it, likely at the hands of the others. That's probably one part of it, but is Aaron Greyjoy going to be learning another part of it too in his final chapter before he ends up buying it again? I mean, all these characters are dying left and right.
I don't think any of the Ironborn around Euron are ever really going to know what's up with him. I think that's kind of the point. Dampere knows the most, and even he's ignorant. I think if that revelation is true and we do get it, I think it comes via Bran. Whether like Bloodraven confesses it to him, or my preferred option, Euron directly shows up on the astral plane during Bran's
that would be
vision
so awesome. That'd be fucking
to mess with him. We do see like the Night King showing up in Bran's visions and causing problems in season 6, and the Night King seems in part taken from Euron in the book. So I'm just saying it's possible. That would be great. Give it to me.
Please give it to me too. I would take that. All right, Legolas 71088 asks, so what are you both writing? No obligation to answer. I know it's the worst thing to be asked. Well, why don't I take this opportunity to again lean back a little bit and have you tell the people a little bit about this story that I've been reading?
I don't want to talk too much about it because there's an inverse relationship between how much you talk about what you're writing and how much you actually get done, I think, a lot of the time.
Shit.
But I'm reading a book called Too Deep. It's like a fantasy sci-fi horror novel about a bunch of people in a bunch of different dimensions, and the walls between their dimensions are starting to collapse, and now they have to decide what to do about it. And that's kind of like the basic premise of it, and I kind of taken a lot of different directions from there. But it's going really well. I got like over 50,000 words into it at this point, and an outline of the bunch of the rest. So it's great. I'm loving it.
You doing any Song of Ice and Fire meta writing at this time, or
say again, sir?
Are you doing any Song of Ice and Fire meta writing or anything like that at this time?
That's on the back burner at the moment. I'd love to do something about Stannis and Jon and in that relationship and that dynamic. That might be next. But I always get inspirations for ideas and then they fall on the back burner. So we'll see which one grabs at me.
Yeah, that's true. It's always one of those things. I have the same thing where I have like 10 ideas and then I end up not writing those 10 ideas. For me, I'm continue to work on the Cautioner's Tale. I'm pretty. I want to say I'm close to being done again, but you're never really truly done because the way these things work. So I'm good. I'm likely. I think I've put a date of within the next 60 days to start querying again for that, which is the process where you attempt to lure a potential agent to end up selling your book to major publishers, and that's kind of what I'd like to do. I do have I shouldn't say too much about this. But I do have a one friend of ours and friend of the show. So she is a listener who has said that she would be interested in presenting stuff and presenting my stuff to potential agents. And I was like, thank you. That's really sweet and awesome. So
that's exciting. I wish you luck, buddy. I always
appreciate that. Yeah,
always have high hopes for us both in that regard. But the writing process itself is important to keep the brain chewing. It definitely makes me better at A Song of Ice and Fire. You know what I mean?
Absolutely agree. And then on that level, I'm doing I'm writing in the process of writing a piece on Dorne, which
So you teasing that all over the place.
I'm not even like teasing it. I'm just like I was inspired. So I guess I'll talk about it here. I was inspired a little bit by George R. R. Martin as a gardener. What does it actually mean in the story? Like he has talked about, he's a gardener, not an architect. And I was trying to think about how Dorne came into being in A Song of Ice and Fire, and how George gardened this place, or I think the title is something about water garden Dorne into the main story, into the A plot of A Song of Ice and Fire, namely to Daenerys Targaryen's story, and also to young Griff's story come, the Winds of Winter. Sure. And how it works in a lot of great ways and how it doesn't work in every which way, in every way. I mean, Darkstar being the main example where it doesn't work, Quentin being the example where it really, really is effective in tying, George guarding this story into the main plot. So that's kind of what I'm working on in terms of writing. And of course, every week we're, this episode for Clash Kings Brand 4 was 24 pages on the Google Documents side. So we're always working on that every single week. And next week is going to be Tyrion's 7th chapter, which is going to be another doozy, another seemingly short chapter that we'll probably end up doing, 12,000 words on probably. We
got the Storm's End chapters coming up. Those might have to be some split ups in terms of like we did with the prologue and Davos went on Dragonstone. The Storm's End chapters are dense. Catelyn 3 and 4 and Davos 2. There's so much going on in those, so can't wait.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. So thank you for the question. We've got a lot of response on that one. So we're excitingly writing stuff, and we are excited that you guys are excited on our behalf. And we'll see how it goes.
Damn right.
All right. Lord Micah asks, how does Bran's supporting cast hold up? So this is a recurring question we have in these live casts. How does the supporting cast, Danny, John, Theon? So now we're doing Bran's supporting cast. How does it hold up? Also, how is it compared to Jon's and Tyrion's and Arya's supporting cast? I think it's extremely effective. Like Danny's supporting cast is fuck all. Jon's supporting cast is somewhat strong, and Theon's supporting cast is interesting, although not particularly memorable, besides Dagmar Cleftjaw and Asha Greyjoy, who becomes not a supporting character in her own right come A Feast for Crows. I think it's probably Bran's supporting cast is among the strongest in the series. I would say Jojen and Mira specifically, Hodor, Luwin. These are all characters that are extraordinarily memorable, and you remember specific plot beats and character points about them. And I think that's important when we're talking about how strong of a supporting cast is that you as a reader, it stays imprinted on my mind. It likely stays imprinted on a lot of your guys' mind too, about who these guys are and what they do for the story for Bran.
I think he gets great mentor relationships, and I do love the different dynamics between the political figures seeking his attention and the magical ones. It is a little thin. Once he leaves Winterfell, it's pretty much just Jojen and Mira, and we really haven't actually seen much time with him in Bloodraven. So that is something it would be nice to see more of. And, Rickon, obviously, is also not much of a character for Bran to play off. So I don't think Bran has weak supporting characters, but I don't think he has many good ones as Jon does, for example, or Arya.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it's going to be interesting when we get to more about Bloodraven's Cave. As you guys probably know, we've said in the past, there was a chapter from Bran's perspective that was cut from A Dance of Dragons, likely to The Winds of Winter, which almost certainly has stuff regarding the Three-Eyed Crow, Bloodraven, potentially Jojen Paste as well. That's my theory, right, or thinking right now, is that cut chapter had Jojen Paste in it, which was heavily foreshadowing Bran's third chapter from A Dance of Dragons. And it's going to be good. It's going to be awesome. Colin asks, can we consider the Ice Spiders as big as Hounds part of Bran's supporting cast?
Well, sure, in that case. Well, that's also like, you get to the other POVs, is like, is Stannis a supporting character in Davos's POV, or the other way around? So these things are always a little fluid.
Agreed there. Will ever Stannis' chapter be split? I'm guessing Guilty Undertaker is asking us whether we will ever not split a chapter that has Stannis Baratheon in it, because we've done, yeah.
Thinking ahead. Oh God, he's probably right, isn't he? Oh Jesus, that's pathetic.
Jon chapters, maybe
when we get to a dance with dragons. So until then, probably yeah.
I'm trying to think. Here. This is just me like speaking out of my ass, and because I've not done any writing or work on it, but there's some Storm Davos chapters which may be 3-4 parts, like Davos's fourth chapter.
Davos 4 is just a mountain. Like when Stephen Atwell did his essay on it, he compared it to like the K2 of a Storm of Swords. It's like, this chapter is just too much. It is. That's gonna be a hard one. Davos 5 too he has his first conversation with Jon goes on forever. There's a reason we love Stannis as a character, because these dialogue scenes are just amazing. And
then they communicate like themes too, especially like power and magic. Like this chapter, from Bran's perspective, is communicating those same things, and Stannis's chapters too. Like from the prologue onwards, is all about the conflict in this guy's mind between like believing himself to be the savior figure and also the king of Westeros. He's supposed to be the mortal political figure, and also the Messiah. And that's really interesting stuff that George does with Stannis, which makes him such a fascinating character in A Song of Ice and Fire, and worthy of multiple episodes for every chapter that he's mentioned one time in. Well, not every chapter he's mentioned one time, but at least appears in, for sure.
For sure. Map guy's been asking a couple times in the Rickard execution chapter. Jane says Rob spent the entire day working on maps and writing letters. Later on, he burnt the letter. What do you think Rob was writing? Okay, so this is A Storm of Swords, Catelyn 3. The walls are coming down for Rob. He's just executed Rickard Karstark. The most common theory, which I've seen brought up a couple times in the chat in regards to this question, is that Rickard was writing to the families of Tion Frey and Willem Lannister, the squires that Rickard just killed, expressing his apology. And I think that's entirely possible. I think he also could have been writing to Harrion Karstark, Rickard's son, to say, hey, I just killed your dad. Some version of that. But it's like, the thing is, the tone of those two letters would be the same, and that's the point. Rob is writing some letter that's really despairing, representative of his mood in this moment, and it's so despairing he can't even fucking finish it. Yeah,
I think I favored that aspect of it too, is that it's the walls are closing in, so Rob Stark is on the decline. And him burning the letter is him, symbolically like showing the end of his story, so to speak. I think there's also a possibility too that there's a prisoner exchange which takes place after that point in time, where Robert Glover is exchanged for which Lannister is he? Is
Martin?
Martin Lannister. Yeah, so he could be writing to Tywin and King's Landing for that prisoner exchange, which does occur because Robert Glover does appear at White Harbor in A Dance with Dragons, and is attempting to rally the North against the Boltons and the Freys. So we'll see how that happens. We got a what if question from Lord Micah. He says, what if Luwin survives and is found by Roose at Winterfell?
Well, then he stops surviving immediately. Is what happens there. So I assume Luwin is just like squatting amidst the ruins of Winterfell, I guess. Yeah, he'd be dead. But so I think if he had hidden without getting killed like Wex, I assume he would like go to maybe like Last Hearth or maybe try for White Harbor. He would try to get to a loyalist center.
Right. He sends in the Brand 6 chapter, he attempts to send ravens out to the different lords, and one of them gets away to White Harbor. That's
right. Exactly. He would follow it up. But yeah, if he's still there when Roose comes, Roose kills him like within seconds of his arrival immediately. First thing.
The entire conceit of what Roose Bolton is doing in the North is attempting to be like Theon Greyjoy burned Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy killed the Stark boys. Theon Greyjoy did this. Theon. We had no part whatsoever to do with whatever happened in the North. Whatever did happen in the North, we don't know. We would like to know more. Please inform us when you have the chance. So it's yeah, he would definitely just murder the bejesus out of him the moment like he would pop into Winterfell. Tony asks, didn't Osha finish off Luwin? It might have been show only. So it's not featured in Bran's final chapter, but it is implied heavily that Luwin asks Osha to stay behind for a moment and sends the kids away. So it's likely that Osha was the one who put her spear through Luwin's heart, most likely.
Yep, asking for mercy in front of the heart tree, a great mirror image to Crescent at the start of the book going down in front of Melisandre. But Luwin finds more peace within the magical world. Because that's these Bran chapters. That was finding peace and harmony, all that good stuff. Guilty Undertaker. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Were you doing the one about the little birds, or do you have another one?
I had another one, but go ahead with the little birds.
No, do yours first.
Okay. Guilty Undertaker asks, well, they're both from Guilty Undertaker. So Guilty Undertaker asks, do you think Roose claimed he arrived at the twins after the Red Wedding happened? It's really not clear what the North knows about Roose's role in the Red Wedding. Information does not seem to have trickled out completely. I mean, it's known he was there, I think, and that he's alive, which kind of gives the game away. But he has plausible deniability. No one seems to know that he personally killed Robb. And no one seems to know that his men actively turned on Robb's army. Even though I got to imagine if Wyman Manderley or the other people in the North are thinking about this for a second, they got to know, wait a minute, how did Walder Frey destroy Robb's army on his own? He had way fewer men. The only answer to that question is Roose helped. Right. So this might just be like shifty plotting in A Dance with Dragons. Maybe there's just no real answer to this. But Roose is trying hard for plausible deniability, and I think he's mostly accomplishing that, as you were saying, about the burning of Winterfell by just not talking about it.
Right. And SKNC brings up a great point in the comments where he says, I mean, Roose Bolton arrives with a totally intact army to Winterfell and actually to Barrowden first. So again, it's another beat where you're like, yeah, it doesn't make sense that the Northern Lords wouldn't be like, this guy, all of our brothers and cousins and all died, and this guy gets off scot-free for reasons.
But who's going to go first? Who's going to be the first to say that to Roose's face?
No one.
The thing. No one wants to be first. So I think that's Roose's advantage. Roose also oddly benefits from Ramsay being as terrible as he is because everyone's attention is kind of there and not on him.
And the phrase too, because the
phrase.
No, it's interesting in Theon's later dance chapters. No one's like, hey, you don't get any hints that anyone is like fingering Roose as like the guy who was behind the Red Wedding. But at the same time, it's broadly implied that they know that Roose Bolton was involved in the Red Wedding, but he ends up being able to, kind of project his guilt onto his bastard son and onto the Freys who are there at Winterfell. Because they're always like, may the Freys choke on their lies, as Wyman Mannerly says. And, Barbara Dustin's also like talking about the Freys had a part in the Red Wedding and so forth. So,
well, everyone knows. I mean, the Freys hosted the Red Wedding. They're the public face of it. Everyone knows that. Roose and Tywin are the ones trying to hide their hands in it, and I think it's only partially successful.
Agreed. A Victarion question. There we go. Map Guy asks, why does Victarion agree to go with the Dusky Woman? He initially declined, but gave in when Euron said she would be killed. Is that just plot convenience because he's not a decent guy? He's not a decent guy.
Euron is extremely vulnerable where the combination of Euron and violence towards women is concerned because of what happened with his third wife. Because Euron had sex with her, probably raped her, and then Victarion felt the need to kill her. So Victarion is very sensitive on this particular subject. Doesn't mean he's a humanitarian in general. He happily burns people, including women, in his final chapter in A Dance with Dragons. But he instinctively flinches away from the idea of letting Euron kill another woman because of him. And of course, Euron knows exactly that that's what Victarion's going to think, and that's how he manipulates him into taking the Dusky Woman along.
Yeah, the Victarion, good guy, right? No. But
he's a human monster as opposed to Euron, who is just nothing resembling a human being at this point. And that contrast, I think, is important. Victarion is like, I know that guy. Euron's like, you're not a person.
Victarion has lines he won't cross. Euron has no lines that he will.
Euron's whole thing is crossing lines. Yep.
Absolutely. Just Reds asks, do you think there will be a naval coalition to fight Euron aside from the Red Wine fleet, perhaps Aurane and the Manderley fleet? I think from the Forsaken, we know that it's not just the Red Wine fleet that's coming for Euron's fleet. It's actually the Red Wine fleet has come around the Arm of Dorne at this point and is sailing for Euron. But there's also the I was about to say the High Garden, but it's not the Old Town fleet. So we have what was the
High Towers?
The High Tower fleet is coming, as well as some of the Shield Island fleets that survived the battle from the Shield Islands from A Feast for Crows. They are all coming, so they're hoping to catch Euron, kind of this, whatever this movement is that I can't think of right now. I was in the army at one point in my life.
He swears.
Yeah, I swear. So it is not just going to be just the Red Wines coming. The interesting question is Aurane Waters and the stolen fleet that he takes to the Stepstones, is he going to play a role in taking down Euron Greyjoy? If I'm Aurane Waters, I'm like saying, fuck that shit. Like if Euron destroys the Red Wine and the High Tower fleets at some sort of battle, brings some sort of eldritch apocalypse down onto them. If I'm Aurane Waters, my intense need to survive would say that I'm not going to actually be sailing against Euron Greyjoy, this apocalyptic monster who is bringing fucking kragons and potentially dragons down onto my enemies. So no, I'm staying away from that shit.
I also think Euron's done with ships at that point. Like he's going to Old Town, he's going inland. He needed the Ironborn to get this far, and this is about it. So I think Willis and Garland are raising an outright army to deal with him. I think that's the next stage. Would be my guess.
Yeah, I agree there. So we're going to see some land battles come in the Reach through Samuel's perspective. Come the Winds of Winter. 2 more questions. Do you think that's good? And
sure, that works for me.
Tonight. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. I apologize. You
good? Take your time. What else we got here, folks?
Okay, Micah asked another question. Any prediction for Mira's future? I always thought of her as either going to live with Howland Reed or remaining as Bran's close protector, armed with Dark Sister.
Dark Sister is a good bet, especially with Blood Raven nearby. I hope she goes home. I really hope the whole thing about Bran wants to comfort her via Hodor doesn't pay off, because that is just terrifying on so many levels. So I really hope that Bran gets interrupted before he can make that happen. Yeah, I think Mira's probably going to go home. Again, I know people don't like that scene in season 7, but I think it captures the idea that Mira is going to have to move on from this person who's just a completely different person now and has just moved past the Reeds, and they kind of seem small by comparison. I think that's the emotion they're going for. But I think she'd be a great Lady of the Neck, and Howland's heir, so I hope she gets to go home to be that.
You don't see any potential that they're going to get together, Bran and Mira, at the end of the series?
I might have before the whole I'm going to use Hodor to hug and kiss you thing. That's a hard obstacle for a relationship in the past, but we'll see.
And also, Mira is very upset with Bran in the final chapter, in his final chapter in Dance of Dragons, for reasons that are not entirely clear, but maybe directly related to Jojen.
He might have eaten her brother. We'll see. I would have difficulty kissing a person feeling the taste of my own brother between their lips. That would be a turnoff for me, but I can't speak for everybody.
It's just not my kink either. So I guess we'll have to agree there, as we always do. All right, one final question as I'm scrolling up and down trying to find something interesting to ask. All right, final question for Max L. Is Ramsay kicking the bucket early on and wins, or is he sticking around for a while? Things like the Battle of Bastards feel cliche, but also foreshadowed by George. So what Max is referring to is, I believe, is there was a note from one of the scripts that George submitted for season 4, in which he said that we need to have the dogs in the show in order to set up a scene from season 6, which was going to be the season that was going to intersect with the Winds of Winter, because it was going to be published back in 2015, if you remember this from back in the day. I've had it on the super far back burner, but I originally had a idea for this series that I was writing back in 2019, over a year ago at this point. about from the Broken Country series, which a later part of the essay series would deal with my idea that potentially the Boltons may be defeated at Winterfell and flee back to the Dreadfort, and then potentially Jon, having forsaken the Night's Watch vows, comes to Winterfell. Maybe Stannis tells him to go fuck off, and Jon decides that he's going to do the same thing he told Stannis to do, which is to rally the North to his side by defeating a common foe in the form of the Boltons, and that's why Jon would go there. I don't know if that's actually reality, but I do think that there's a possibility that Ramsay sticks around for a little while beyond the early start of the Winds Winter. Now, it's interesting to me, and I think you've actually talked about this specifically, is that I don't have the same faith about Roose Bolton sticking around very far past the Winds Winter. In fact, he could even be dead by the end of A Dance of Dragons.
Roose is gone. Ramsay's killing Roose pretty much straight away. Ramsay, I could see. I mean, there's the parallels and contrast between him and Jon that I get are very appealing. I could definitely see Ramsay like hightailing it out of Winterfell, especially since, you know, Barbara Justin doesn't like him. The rest of the Northerners doesn't like him. He might have to run for it after killing Roose and Walda, and then ended up maybe like being killed by Jon in Ghost, like while surrounded by his dogs. I could definitely see that being a development, or just hunted down by Jon personally. But the Bolton power is gonna break very quickly in the Winds of Winter, even if one individual like Ramsay survives. I think they will be removed from a faction from the field regardless very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Boltons are Stannis exists just to clear the Boltons out of the way in order for the true king to arrive. That is Jon, and then eventually Bran in the story. So I think that about wraps us up for this live cast for this episode. Thank you guys very, very much for joining in with us and listening to us and supporting us and all the great things you do for us. If you guys like these things, feel free to subscribe to us and, you know, give us 5 stars. No, you don't do 5 stars on YouTube. Give us the thumbs up on YouTube. Smash that like button, subscribe, you know, do all those types of things. And, you know, on YouTube, which I'm not super familiar with, as you can probably already tell, more of the podcast guy. But yeah, we really appreciate it. And we love doing these things with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, folks. We'll be right back here next month to do it again for you.
Absolutely. So, bye.